Welcome back, Legends. This is Animemonster Pro. Today's story is, we will see second part. What if Harry Potter unlocked the legendary power of his bloodline? Here's a quick glimpse. When a hidden power within his bloodline awakens, Harry gains access to magic long thought lost. As his strength grows beyond anything the wizarding world has seen, he begins to reshape his destiny, and the future itself. Before we dive in, if you enjoy powerful stories like this, make sure to subscribe to Animemonster Pro and share it with your friends. Now, let the story unfold. Hermione came to, confused and uncomfortable. There was a light weight on her left side, and she felt rather achy. She was squeezed with Harry somehow in the large, leather chair in his study. They had both obviously fallen asleep fully clothed in a very awkward and embarrassing position. She shook the sleep from her head. Harry shifted slightly beneath her, his arms wrapped around her tightly, her legs draped over his. Their clothes rustled from the sudden friction caused by her movements. Hermione took a moment to watch her best friend as he slept. He's truly beautiful and peaceful when he sleeps. His head was tilted back with his wild hair going in all directions, and his mouth was open in a carefree, lopsided grin that made her heart melt. She decided then she could forgive him for his morning breath. The only evidence of his emotional breakdown earlier were the dried tears marring his otherwise angelic face and the lingering smell of butterbeer. Over the course of their post-breakfast nap, Harry had somehow switched positions with her. Where she had held him until he fell asleep, Harry was now holding her, his arms wrapped protectively around her as if it were the most natural thing in the world. With her head so close to his, Hermione felt another wave of contentment, mixed with a tinge of emotional discomfort. She had longed for this moment, dreamt of it even. She had wanted to be held by him like this for a long time, but she would have preferred it to be under better conditions and for Harry to be awake. Feeling her body's protests and the need to relieve herself growing more uncomfortable and pressing by the second, Hermione carefully detached herself from Harry, peeling his arms off of her. Harry groaned softly but moved as she directed. His watch, his grandfather's, she corrected herself, dangled out from the inside of his robes. She swore under her breath as she saw the time. It was nearly 5 in the evening. They are going to kill me, she sighed at the thought of her parents' reactions to her hours-long disappearance. She didn't even know why she had fallen asleep. She could not remember closing her eyes or feeling drowsy. She had not been tired in any way before she came over to Potter Manor to berate Harry that morning. Master Harry's Grandee is awake, a house elf exclaimed, popping suddenly into the room and startling Hermione tremendously. Dobby is pleased to announce that dinner is being finished. Hermione stumbled and caught herself on the chair. Harry stirred slightly at the sudden noises. She placed her finger to her lips in a shushing motion. The elf's eyes widened as he noticed that Harry was still sleeping. Before he, and Hermione was pretty sure the elf was male, nodded his head slowly. Hermione gestured to the other side of the room and headed that way, the elf quietly following. She took some parchment from Harry's desk and wrote a brief letter to her parents, informing them that she would be spending the night at Potter Manor. She also invited them to join her at the manor if they so wished, to keep her father from getting too suspicious. Dobby, right? The elf nodded ecstatically as Hermione handed him the note. The name tugged at Hermione's memory, but she let the feeling go after a moment of drawing a blank. Could you please deliver this to my parents? They live. The elf was off before she could even finish giving him directions. Hermione blinked. Is it possible that elves can locate anyone? He can't really know where I live if I haven't told him, right? Or maybe he read my mind. Pondering the still unresearched extent and wonders of elven magic, Hermione was completely distracted until Dobby returned with a small note from her mother. Stay safe, we expect you to be at your father's birthday breakfast. Love, Mom. Hermione wondered if this was her mother's way of toying with her. Her father's birthday wasn't for another 2 days. She wondered what her mother had done to get her father to agree or what she will do. Hermione shuddered at the very thought of her mother blackmailing her father with, say, Mistress Grandee. Dobby asked, getting her attention. Dobby is serving dinner for the family in the dining hall, but Master Harry's Snapey, uncles, God Doggy and Weasel are in the meeting room next to the library. You should join them. Not interested in seeing any of the people who most likely blamed her for Henriette's current excommunication, Hermione immediately liked the idea of eating separately. She was sure that Harry's family placed the blame on her, even though Harry had reassured her that he and his family placed the blame solely on Henriette's shoulders. Hermione had avoided his manor the last few days largely because of her inkling. Hermione thanked the elf and made her way to bathroom connected to the study to freshen up before she made her way to the meeting room next to Harry's massive library. When she opened the door to the room, she was taken aback by the lively and cheerful atmosphere. Their joy and celebration were in the air. Hermione was surprised to see Professor Snape amicably interacting with Sirius. Celestina Warbeck was playing loudly in the background. "Ah, Hermione, when did you get in?" Sirius called out loudly as he spotted her in the doorway. Hermione shook her head at the red cheeks and the waft of whiskey in the air. "At least they're taking it better than Harry." "I arrived after breakfast," she said, taking the seat across from Sirius. A plate of food and silverware engraved with the Potter emblem immediately appeared before her. It was as if the elves or Dobby had read her mind. The delicious-looking chicken fillet with roasted potatoes and the right amount of sauce were simply mouth-watering. "Hey, why didn't that blasted elf serve us that?" Bill asked, pointing to his bowl of, what appeared to be, tomato soup. Dobby appeared with a crack, with his hands on his hips and 3 chef hats balanced somehow on his head. "They must be held together by magic," Hermione assumed. "Yous get what yous deserves, Mr. Weasel." Dobby waved a wooden ladle at the redhead, who flushed red with anger at the butchering of his name. Hermione had the feeling that Dobby did not like Bill. "Until Master Harry is here, Dobby serves what Dobby wants, tomato soups." Sirius smiled cautiously at the angry elf, eyeing the dangerous-looking, tomato soup-laden wooden spoon it wielded like a blood-coated sword with something akin to fear. "I think what Bill meant to nicely ask is, why does Hermione get the main course before the soup?" He gulped slightly as the elf focused his attention on him. "She is Master Harry's mistress. She eats what Master Harry would." Sirius and Harry's uncles Milton Arnold and Franklin Cecil shared an odd look, and Hermione blushed to the roots of her bushy hair. Sirius' eyes lit up with a mischievous light that made Hermione regret ever leaving Harry's side. "I'm here, Dobby." Hermione jumped at the sound of his voice. Harry entered the meeting room with slightly reddened eyes, but there were otherwise no visible signs that he had been bawling just hours before, or that we just spent the past hours sleeping uncomfortably in a chair. She wondered briefly if he had used magic to fix his appearance. Her mind ran through a list of cosmetic charms that would have removed bed hair and puffy eyes. "Would you be so kind and serve the rest of dinner, please?" Harry asked Dobby kindly. Dobby gave Bill a small glare and left to carry out Harry's order. Hermione suddenly connected the elf's name to the elf that tried to help Harry in their second year and then once more last year during the Triwizard Mess. She wondered briefly how he came to be a Potter house elf. Harry picked out the seat next to Hermione. He gave her a brief peck on the cheek, not noticing or not caring to notice the amused looks the others sent their way. "Thank you for being there for me earlier," he whispered in her ear. Hermione nodded, not trusting her mouth to do anything but chew at the moment. "So, who managed to upset Dobby?" he asked as the meal was served. "Everyone except Hermione." Pointed at Bill. Harry sighed as a plate of food slammed down before the redhead, some of its contents spilling over the plate. "Do I even want to know?" "Nope, just your usual Weasley temper up against the stubborn loyalty of an abnormally independent head house elf," Sirius said, taking a huge bite out of a warm roll. Harry glared at Bill, who was picking potatoes off his lap. I know. I will apologize to the elf," the redhead said with his hands out. "I just wanted to get you so we could celebrate." He wouldn't even promise to wake you. Nearly 20 minutes of heated discussion, Professor Snape said with just a hint of disdain as he cut into his meal with the precision of a surgeon. "We had to turn on the wireless just to get some peace." "What exactly is there to celebrate?" Hermione asked, taking a pause from her meal. It was rather entertaining to watch Harry hold a conversation over a meal. "I don't think he even knows that the entire table focuses on his every word and action." Everyone gave her an, "Are you serious?" look. "I mean," she said with a roll of her eyes, "the prophet was rather tight-lipped about what you all did and promised a reportage tonight, but the wireless has been playing Celestina Warbeck since I opened the door." Everyone looked at Harry, as if for permission. He shrugged. "I would have just shown her the memory." Bill swallowed a mouthful of food and emptied his glass of alcohol. "It all went by quickly, even though it felt like hours for me. I wouldn't even call it a battle. The place was filled with new recruits and werewolves." Harry winced, most likely remembering the young recruits he had known or known of from Hogwarts. "And no one stopped you?" Hermione was surprised. She grabbed Harry's hand under the table and received a brilliant smile in return. "Why would they when we were Death Eaters?" Bill asked with a self-satisfied smile. "Move it or lose it, Potter." Snape Bill snarled as Jonas Harry stumbled through the entrance to the dungeons of Snakeface's lair. He could hear FC's snickering over his spit set they had split up with the invisible FC just moments before on the ground floor. You are enjoying this way too much, Snape, Harry decided as they quickly made their way deeper into the manor. It had been remarkably easy to infiltrate Riddle's manor. The guards barely looked at them with Snape's standoffish demeanor, and, due to the fact that no one wanted anything to do with Jonas, they were both avoided and ignored. Jonas. Hermione blurted out, your cousin Jonas. A dark look grew on Harry's face. Don't worry, he was stunned in his bed here the entire time, Milton said coldly, purposely redirecting the conversation in a safer direction. Bill went on to recount how he located his brother, Charlie, and the other captives. He shivered as he recalled the conditions of the cells and their inmates. It was horrible. Some people were so dehydrated and starved that their magic was just barely keeping them alive, and the smell of those who didn't manage to survive. He went silent for a moment. How many do you think we managed to free? FC asked after a moment. Bill paused. 20. 30. Definitely a lot. There are too many people to break out, he stated to his brother as he cleaned up some of Charlie's smaller wounds. Charlie and the other dragon tamers had apparently received preferential treatment. They were the least tortured and the best fed, probably since Riddle had big plans for them. Bill quickly reminded himself that Charlie and the other tamers had only been kidnapped 3 days ago. Some of the other inmates looked as if they had spent quite a few weeks in the Death Eater's care. The noise levels were getting rather high as the released captives rejoiced, cried, asked questions and begged for medical help. There is no way to get them all out like Harry wanted, he assessed. Bill gathered the strongest captives and asked them to help him bring everyone into one room. He looked at his watch. F.K. 5 minutes had already passed, and they hadn't even gotten to the dragons yet. Remembering the spit thing that Harry had given him to communicate, he tapped it with his wand. Harry. Can you hear me? Harry took over the storytelling with a small laugh, setting his soup to the side. The rest of their soups lay untouched on the table. Hermione barely noticed house elves removing the bowls. There I was, hunting Nagini with FC's Horcrux detector in one hand and my wand in the other when this idiot screams like a ghoul into the headset, Harry growled mentally as he dropped FC's detector. The small round glass orb hit the ground with a loud crash, releasing the shard of Snakeface's soul that had previously leached onto Harry's scar. The black wisp gave a small scream as it disappeared off to wherever souls, or parts of souls, go. He closed his eyes in frustration. He could hear the unwanted sound of footsteps hurrying in his direction. Bill, he said with barely restrained fury into the spitset, this is a headset. You can speak as if I am standing next to you and I'm not King Deaf. He heard the redhead yelp in response to his shout over the spitset. So sorry, the man whispered. Now, I'm not used to this type of device. Harry sighed. I know. What do you want? Because of your moronic screaming, I just dropped and lost my Horcrux detector. Shite. I'm sorry, I thought. What do you want? Harry grit his teeth as his perimeter charms picked up 3 people less than 20 feet away from him. Right, there are more captives than we originally assumed, at least 20 more. Damn. Harry said he saw 3 recruits nervously checking the corridor. He mentally thanked the Australian unspeakables for making robes that kept others from hearing the wearer. Do you think it was the snake? One asked worriedly, looking around the dimly lit corridor. Who else could it be so close to his sham? Harry quickly stunned the 3 in quick succession. He had a plan. His stomach churned at the very thought of what he would do, but the chances of it succeeding seemed pretty high. FC, do you think you can get to Bill? I think we can work that many people into the plan. The dragons will be hard, but as long as everyone gets out on time, I'm happy. I have extra portkeys. I'm almost done with the detonators. I have 1 more floor to go and then I'll be on my way to William I will come to you when I'm done. No, I have a new plan for getting Nagini. I will portkey out alone once I bring down the wards. Remember, you two, this all has to happen within seconds. Wards down, everyone out, and then detonate. Harry slowly transfigured 2 of the young recruits into rats. Human transfiguration was one of the hardest to achieve, and it wasn't taught at Hogwarts until their 7th year for good reason. It was dangerous magic if done incorrectly. It usually meant painful disfiguration and sometimes even death if vital organs were ruptured or disturbed. For Harry, it was merely a thing of concentration. Hermione turned to him with wide eyes and a gaping mouth. But that's NEWTS level coursework. Harry gave her a lopsided grin. I promise to help you when McGonagall teaches it to us. Your father was very talented in human transfiguration too. You know he boasted about his O with distinctions on his NEWTs almost every day. After we received the results, Sirius said. Snape gave a disgusted look and a roll of his eyes. Sirius continued obliviously and proudly. Animagi usually are, since it takes years of practice with human transfiguration to become an animagus. Here Sirius gave Harry a look full of suspicion, which Harry answered with a small smile. Why rats, though? Uncle Milton asked slowly. Is that some sort of symbolism? Servants of the snake, being turned into its prey. Harry laughed at the deep question. It was something like that. He got up to turn the wireless down a notch before he took his seat again. The detector had registered that Nagini was close by, and the Death Eater mentioned that Snakeface's chambers were also nearby, so I naturally assumed. Harry used legilimency on the young recruit, a Daniel Yaxley, the son of the captured Corbin Yaxley. As Harry soon discovered, he had graduated from Hogwarts 2 years before Harry had arrived. His younger brother, Walton, would be arriving at Hogwarts next year. What a pity, Harry thought sorrowfully. If the man wasn't such a murderous bigot, which the glance into his memories proved him to be, Harry would have happily let the man go. Yaxley was in training to be a Medi-Wizard. He pulled the location to the throne room from the guy's head before he transfigured him into a rat as well. He re-stunned all 3 of the rodents and made his way to the throne room. He felt himself go through 3 different identification wards and at least 1 unfamiliar ward. The polyjuice and magical signature charms protected him, but he quickened his pace regardless. He took a vial of concentrated sleeping draught from his robe pocket and carefully poured it over the 3 rats, careful to avoid their faces for fear of putting them asleep. Before Nagini even got to them, he enlarged the men rodents to roughly the size of small dogs. He closed his eyes and steadied his breathing. Now, he threw open the door to the chamber, renovated the rodents and banished the frightened men rodents into the room. In the middle of the rather dark and barren room was Voldy's ridiculously ornamented and oversized throne. Harry shook his head at the obvious posturing, his eyes focused on the enormous and familiar snake that was wrapped around the throne and tracking the movements of the enlarged rodents with the precision of a hungry predator. The 3 recruits had factored perfectly into his plans. He had originally wanted to conjure rats but had worried about how Nagini would respond. Magical snakes tended to have a 6th sense about conjured versus natural prey. Uncle Milton had drilled that in his head. When they discussed the basilisk in his 2nd year under the time bubble and considered how Harry could have done it differently, Harry had proposed conjuring a rooster and set off a 3-hour-long discussion about the awareness of magical animals. The transfigured rodents might smell differently to Nagini, but they were and remained live animals, regardless of human or rodent. To her, Harry hoped that her predator instincts kicked in. Luckily he didn't have to wait long. Like lightning, the monstrosity of a snake sprung at and bit one of the men rodents, wrapped another up in its coils and followed the movements of the 3rd rat with its salivating head. Harry watched the clock of his wristwatch. After 20 or so seconds, and after consuming 2 of the men rats, the snake's movements started getting more and more sluggish. Come on, he thought, come on. Like a tired giant, the snake swayed slowly for a few moments before it finally hit the ground with a heavy sound. Harry swallowed the bile rising in his throat and clamped down his occlumency shields at the sight of the 2 large lumps in the snake's body and the mauled man rodent in its mouth. He closed his eyes in prayer for the 3 recruits. He sent the most powerful stunner he knew at the sleeping snake, pressed a small voice-activated portkey onto the snake, and quickly scouted the room. FC, are you on your way to Bill? There was a pause on the Spitset. I am just now getting out of the potions labs. You will like what I found here. Riddle should be careful about where he leaves his notes. Maybe he just left in a hurry. Nevertheless, I will be there in less than a minute. Okay. Bill, how is everything looking on your end? We just bandaged up everyone. Charlie went to take care of the doctor. What? Hold on, Charlie, I will come with you. Please confirm when all dragons and prisoners are ready for port keying. So, next thing I knew, Charlie had thrown me into a room with starving and furious dragons, Bill said as he took a sip of alcohol. Hermione gasped in disbelief. Hermione was truly impressed with his courage. She suddenly saw Bill in a completely different light. Maybe as a curse breaker, he is used to such life-threatening situations. She couldn't imagine facing just one of the beasts, let alone a whole score of them. Her mind flashed back to how frightened she had been for Harry when he faced the Hungarian Horntail last year. I held my own while Charlie. Weren't you whimpering in a corner when I arrived? FC interrupted slowly with a sly wink to Hermione. Bill sputtered. Harry continued the story while everyone else shared a small chuckle at Bill's expense. Harry removed his cloak and spent a minute poking around Snakeface's throne, finding nothing. He had hoped to find a secret library or some treasure stash like he had with Snape in the Chamber of Secrets earlier that day. FC strongly believed that Snakeface was a kleptomaniac due to the items he used for his Horcruxes. Harry would have expected Snakeface to keep his treasures close to him. As if summoned, and with a series of pops, Snakeface and a few of his servants appeared in the throne room. Harry jumped out his skin and immediately ran to find refuge behind the throne. He hesitated a moment and looked from behind the throne. Voldy took a look at his snake and threw Harry a furious and confused look. "Potter, what have you done to Nagini?" For a moment Harry feared that Voldemort could see through his Jonas disguise, but he scratched that thought with the lack of killing curses being thrown his way. Aye, he made to respond when Voldemort deeply sniffed the air. Harry briefly wondered if the man could pick up scents like an animal. An imposter. Did he bloody merge with a snake? Spells of all types crashed into the stone throne. Harry's adrenaline hit the roof. FC, Snakeface is in the building. We have to hurry. We need a few moments more, Henry. Distract him the best you can. Harry sighed and realized what had to be done. He stood and faced Snakeface confidently. "Hi, Tom. Nice accommodation you have here. The welcome leaves a bit to be desired, but I never expected more from the jumped-up son of both a squib and a muggle." Before Voldemort or his followers could react, Harry wordlessly summoned the clothes of some of the men and women present. As he danced around the throne room he barely batted an eye as a handful of the Death Eaters intercepted and fell victim to the spells and curses meant for him. Some of the Death Eaters stopped casting altogether, afraid to hit their comrades or get hit themselves. "Henry, bring down the wards," FC said over the spits. At Harry sighed in relief. Harry pulled a special coin from his pocket and threw it to the ground. As soon as it hit the stone floor, a shockwave of magic knocked everyone to the ground. There was a loud, long cracking sound as if someone or something was ripping the very air around them. Dazed, Harry righted himself just as Voldemort sent a dark curse in his direction. Harry tried to summon another of the snake's followers and realized too late that Voldy had put up a shield around them. Left with no other choice, Harry summoned Nagini into the path of the curse. Mere moments before it would have hit him in the sleeping snake exploded in a grotesque spray of blood, partially digested men, rats and flesh. Harry gagged. Voldemort's rage was, even for Harry, impressive. His Death Eaters took a few steps back and waited for orders. "You will die." Snakeface roared. His wand glowed an ominous black and green. A new Death Eater rushed into the room. "My lord. The wards have been deactivated." The head of the Death Eater was blasted back, detached from its body, in the direction in which he had come, and his body jerked on the ground. Snakeface panted heavily. Harry could tell that he was still suffering from the Potter family spell. One of the Death Eaters giggled insanely at the gory scene. Lestrange. "Henry, we are out." FC's voice was like a godsend in the seconds of intermission. His multitasking mind left the battle for a single moment, and that was all chance that Snakeface needed. An unknown, black spell clipped Harry in the leg, throwing him to the ground. "FC, detonate now." He all but yelled in agony over the spitset. He quickly said the trigger word for his portkey as an avalanche of deathly spells headed his way. Boom. Harry was instantly portkeyed out of the throne room to a hill a few miles away from the manor and watched amazed as it went up in a hellish, blinding ball of flames. He could feel the heat from the roaring inferno even at such a distance. Harry heard surprised and panicked yells from the village nearby. Harry was happy to note that the fire was contained to the proximity of the wards Snakeface had erected to keep people from finding his hideaway. FC had told him that the magical fire would only burn things with magic in its proximity, but it was another thing to witness the perfect sphere of fire. How are they going to explain that to the non-mags? Harry wondered. He tried to stand up and immediately collapsed in unimaginable pain. Snakeface's spell had done a number on his leg. Skin, muscles, tendons and even blood were slowly blackening and withering. He threw up in the grass as the bones in his thighs slowly became visible. "FC, medic. That's our code word for when someone takes a fatal hit in battle," FC added. "I managed to stop the withering curse with the assistance of Henry's magic. I am confident it can be healed, but he will most likely walk with a painful limp for rest of his days." Hermione was pale beyond anything Harry had ever seen before. "It's fine, my own," he reassured, giving her a charming smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "It was a small price to pay. I would have happily sacrificed a lot more to put such a dent into Snakeface's forces." "Cheers to that." Snape lifted his glass in a toast, which Harry and the others returned. Hermione seemed lost for words. Harry gave her hand a squeeze. He knew that she wasn't sure what to make of the sacrifices each of them was willing to make to ensure that Snakeface met his end, and that soon, but she will have to get used to it at least. How many of the bastards did we put down? Bill said, slurring his words slightly. Harry gestured to Sirius to remove the bottle of fire whiskey from within the redhead's reach. The last thing they needed was a drunken Weasley in their midst. Dobby might deal with him like he dealt with Lucius Malfoy, or even try to duel the idiot. Harry giggled mentally at Dobby and Bill going at it in a duel. That's a rather cold way of asking how many people died. Hermione all but growled. Or have many people I killed? Harry thought with a small pang of remorse. He shook himself mentally. He forced himself to stay strong. People die in war, Harry told her simply, his occlumency keeping his voice steady. They all chose to serve Snakeface, and they paid for it. And at what price to your emotional health and stability? She blurted out, you can't sit here pretending as if you did not suffer from the fact that you murdered dozens of people. Murdered or killed? Harry sighed. He looked to Sirius and Snape for help. Snape cleared his throat. Well, Potter and I went to Hogwarts, into the Chamber of Secrets, and harvested Salazar's centuries-old basilisk. There was a lot of climbing and exploring involved. We found a hidden room with some ancient Parseltongue scrolls that seemed to have been collected by Slytherin over the course of his lifetime, he said as he swirled his drink. Luckily, Potter went with me into the chamber before the battle, otherwise we would have never found a way out, or is it more appropriate to say, simultaneously. There was a moment of complete silence. Only voices from the radio in the background were heard, yet ignored. Pre-simultaneous, Milton tasted the word. I like it. Cheers to a neologism for Henry being everywhere at once. More senseless toasts followed. The ever-clever Hermione joined in with some juice towards the end. Harry was happy that she finally caught on to their method of coping with what they did, the lives that they took, since they most likely would do so again before Voldemort was gone for good. Harry decided to call it a night when Sirius somehow managed to start a historical debate on the cause of the Black Plague in the 1300s. The Blacks argued for centuries that the plague, which claimed at least 1/3 of non-magical and more than a few magical lives in the 14th century Europe, had been started by their ancestor Yersinia Black and was thus named after her and the Black family. The Blacks swore that Yersinia created the curse in response to her father marrying her off to the invalid Squib, son of the House of Craven, to clear his debts. She was, apparently, one of the founding witches of the Dark Witches' Coven, and, through her, the Blacks had received a lot of their current infamy. Snape and Milton nearly fought each other to disprove that family fable. Bill, naturally, supported Sirius regardless of Bill's ulterior motives. The Weasleys had also intermarried with the Cravens before the house went extinct in the 1500s. Hermione diversified the conversation with history and biology lessons from her non-magical education in FCFC, merely threw in ridiculous comments at random in order to confuse everyone. Suddenly, he heard the wireless mention something of note in the background. He hurried to turn up the volume. If convicted, Headmaster Dumbledore could spend the rest of his natural life in Ministry custody. That was Minister Longbottom's official statement. Oliver, sources within the Ministry tell me that some members of the Wizengamot are pushing for a more extreme punishment. This is Argyle Summers reporting from the atrium of the Ministry of Magic. Harry shushed the bickering behind him. For those of you just now joining us, the office of Minister Longbottom has just confirmed the deaths of 41 Death Eaters at the hands of Lord Potter. With a squad of only 2 other wizards, Lord Potter launched a rescue and raid attack on the Dark Wizard Tom Riddle. Did you hear that? Harry asked the others, sobering up quickly. We already knew about the attack, Bill deadpanned. Harry resisted the urge to pummel the idiot barely. I think Henry is referring to the trial for Dumbledore, FC said coldly. Harry wordlessly vanished the rest of the alcohol and called for sobering potions for the room, much to Sirius' dismay. The vials appeared on the table moments later. Harry and FC quickly helped themselves to the terrible potion before he had even placed the emptied vial back on the table. Dobby popped into the room with an official-looking letter in his hands. From the Ministress, Master Harry. Harry took the letter and opened it. It confirmed a closed door, full Wizengamot session tomorrow morning. He read the list of charges Dumbledore would be facing and sat down heavily in his seat next to Hermione. At her questioning look, he simply handed the letter to her. Bloody idiots, the lot of them. He was just recovering from a battle and now he knew he would be entering another, this time on the political battlefield. Harry closed his eyes as he felt a headache coming. Dobby popped into the room with a headache potion before Harry even voiced his need. "You are the best, Dobby," he gushed as his blossoming headache disappeared. Dobby seemed overwhelmed by the praise. "Harry," Hermione asked as she passed the letter to Snape and Sirius, who read it together, "this is good, right?" Harry took a sip of water as he gazed at the portrait of his grandfather. Charles Potter gazed back at him and presented Harry his golden cane. "In the portrait he must have read my mind. No, we will make it good, though." Hermione shuddered slightly next to Harry from the stairs and whispers. Harry could feel her unease growing even though only a bit of it was visible on her face. Harry couldn't blame her. The room was tense. No one dared to openly oppose the seating arrangement. Not only had Harry dealt Voldemort a deadly blow 2 days prior, but his publicity had grown astronomically. Harry had been declared Henry the Great, and many other flattering names nationally and internationally. Yesterday, Harry the Defender of the Weak and Menace of the Malevolent was his personal favorite. The fact that he had been wounded in the battle had not been noticed or revealed at the press conference since he had been standing still the entire time. So, his entrance into the chambers with a golden cane, many remembered it accurately as that of his grandfather, and with Hermione on his arm and slightly beside him with a supporting hand on his free arm, sent the room into a whisper frenzy. Bloody inbred vultures, the lot of them. Harry refused to wince or show too much of a limp, although Hermione did have to help him at the end, on the stairs. Harry nodded briefly to Lady Bones and Neville, who usually sat on either side of him. He was just as surprised as Hermione when the room created a chair for her next to Neville. It was the seat of an unconfirmed and non-voting heir with the house emblem of the Dagworth Grangers on it, as Neville's held a golden emblem for a confirmed, voting heir with the Longbottom's emblem, 2 legendary and extinct fire lions. Hermione's seat also did not have the same height or golden crowning of the voting seats. It was a welcomed surprise. Harry had originally planned to conjure a seat for her, but the room's magical assistants also fit into their plans. Sirius threw him an encouraging look from across the room. Lady Black was sick with dragon pox, and, as Lord Apparent, Sirius was sitting in for her. Harry was grateful for the additional support. They had brainstormed and came up with numerous plans and contingencies for the session. It would be tricky, but both Sirius and Hermione had reassured him over breakfast that it was solid. Harry felt confident that they would at least push for Veritaserum for Dumbledore. Let the pureblood games begin. The buzzing of the lords and ladies as they wondered who Hermione was, discussed his injury and Dumbledore's misdeeds ended with the arrival of the Minister and Chief Witch. After that, Harry sat attentively yet internally bored to death as the Chief Witch read the long list of charges: neglect of a lord, kidnapping of a lord, numerous abuse of position as chief wizard, numerous abuse of position as headmaster, etc. Harry was deeply annoyed. While he was happy that the old geezer was getting his due and hopeful that he didn't have to put up with the man's scheming anymore, the timing was more than suspicious. It was obvious that the anti-Dumbledore fraction of the Wizengamot had seen an opportunity in Harry's attack on Voldemort's lair and were attempting to seize to remove the man swiftly and completely, as Dumbledore mentioned in the press conference. And despite Harry's clear opposition, many now saw Harry as Dumbledore's natural successor, as the new Lord of the Light. He shuddered in disgust. I definitely prefer Harry the Defender of the Weak and Menace of the Malevolent to that. Hermione gave him a curious look and went back to observing the meeting, possibly more active than anyone else in the room. Harry wanted to roll his eyes, but he knew that it was a once-in-a-lifetime moment for her. He reminded himself that not only was it her first time in the room, but that she was the first ever first-generational witch to sit among the lords and ladies of Britain's Wizengamot. Hermione had been disgusted and honored when he told her that even his mother hadn't been allowed to sit among the Wizengamot in his father's stead. No first-gens were allowed in unless they sat in the visitors' gallery or in the accused chair. It had almost become law a few decades ago. Bring in the accused. The room held its breath as Dumbledore entered. Harry had expected a broken man or an overly confident sorcerer. What he received was a surprising mixture of the two. Dumbledore was led into the room, shackled and at one point, escorted by 3 Aurors, one of whom, Harry vaguely remembered from an order meeting. He briefly considered telling Madame Bones and decided to do so before the trial truly began. The possibility of Dumbledore trying to escape was very high. Though he was dressed in dreary grey robes and looked a little hassled, Dumbledore merely appeared to be waiting for tea time and humoring them all with his presence, not facing years of imprisonment. Harry was almost certain now that the man had an escape plan. I wonder if they even captured him or if he voluntarily turned himself He used the parchment and quill provided to all Wizengamot members on the desks before their seats to write a small note to Lady Bones about his suspicions. He murmured her name, tapped the parchment with his wand, and it disappeared from his desk and reappeared on hers with no one noticing but the two of them. That was how silent communication was made in the chamber. It was to keep opponents from knowing who was supporting whom. He was pleasantly surprised that he had yet to receive any notes today. Usually, there were stacks of at least 10 messages on his desk by the time a session started. Maybe they are too busy gossiping. He heard Lady Bones growl from beside him. She quickly left her seat, and Harry gave Hermione's arm a small squeeze. It was time. Who speaks for the accused? Chief Witch Marchbanks asked, as was required. Harry stood slowly, and a new wave of whispering commenced. House Potter has a few concerns regarding this trial. Harry made his descent to the floor with Hermione's assistance. He could see quills furiously scribbling away, and some of the members who sat in front of him turned around to get a good view of Hermione's family emblem. It would be known to all within moments that an unconfirmed Dagworth Granger heir was in attendance. Hermione held herself bravely. Harry was deeply proud of her. He could see Sirius winking at her. Lords and ladies of this esteemed body, he began, soft and strong, House Potter is grateful for the number of charges presented to this body on its behalf. His golden cane hit the stone floor with a rhythmic precision that perfectly punctuated the flow of his speech. Dumbledore turned his head to watch Harry with a grandfatherly smile on his face. It is merely the suddenness of the trials and the circumstances of the trial that unsettle me. Headmaster Dumbledore is clearly guilty of much wrongdoing, especially against my house personally, but he is not the reason why we should meet. Lord Knott, the father and grandfather of confirmed Death Eaters, loudly interrupted from his seat. I hope your long-winded panegyric can be summarized, Lord Potter. There was no laughter in the room, and Lord Knott looked rather uncomfortable with the heavy silence and acidic glances in his direction. The days of Death Eaters and their similarly minded families reigning in the chamber had long since ended. Harry's trial at the beginning of the summer had spelled an end to that era. Harry merely ignored the man. The youngest heir Knott had been killed in the explosion at Riddle Manor yesterday, according to today's morning edition of the Daily Prophet, and the elder heir Knott had been executed in the Death Eater roundup over the summer. He expected the man to be unruly and rude toward him. Lord Potter, the minister began, obviously surprised. I am surprised by your objection. She cleared her throat. If not for the innumerable injustices and crimes committed by Headmaster Dumbledore, what other reason could there be for this meeting? Harry leaned slightly on his good leg and held his arm out in a placating motion. I do not disagree with the goal, Minister. I disagree with methods. If you wish to save a batch of pickled frog eyes, you shouldn't just remove one bad eye. He channeled a small bit of magic through his voice. Headmaster Dumbledore is guilty of all of those things and more, but if we wish to solve the current issues plaguing our great country, a speedy trial is not sufficient. We have to start with the root of the issue. Harry pointed to the shackled headmaster. Dumbledore is not the cause of all of our problems. He is, like the Tom Riddle, an exploiter of the circumstances this country, this body is guilty of creating and allowing to fester. There were loud and none too pleasant arguments being yelled across the chamber at him. Look around yourselves, he roared, silencing the lot. Look at the number of empty seats. The extinct families, 2 bloody, destructive and nonsensical wars have extinguished over 30 houses have been wiped out in this country. Each family in this country has lost loved ones on one side of the wars or on the other. He made his way closer to the accused chair. It was not Dumbledore or Riddle or even Grindelwald who started these wars. It was pure-blooded mania, inbred idiocy and outmoded stereotypes regarding fellow witches and wizards that emptied these humble halls and our family manors. It was you, he spat. You dare. A stout-looking lord, Harry recognized him as the head of the Greengrasses, bellowed from above. This is truly unfathomable. Do we have to sit and listen to this howl, this upstart's dribble, Chief Witch? Quite a few lords and ladies murmured their agreement. Harry merely laughed. You were going to say, half-blood, Lord Greengrass. The male paled slightly but stood his ground. Please, speak your mind. This half-blood would happily show you why Riddle shouts in fury whenever he hears my very name. The fat man shuddered visibly and sat down. Harry turned to the rest of the lords and ladies. As you all clearly heard, it is not Dumbledore or Riddle's faults for our damaged society. They do not hold you at one point and tell you to believe magical power or prowess is measured in generations of incestuous relations. Harry took a moment to catch himself serious, threw him a warning look from his seat. It was not their goal to insult the genealogy of those present, especially since the Potters practiced similar traditions for centuries. Look around you, he begged. His voice took on an emotional tinge. How many half-bloods, how many first-generational witches and wizards are seated among you? None. And why should they be? Lady Abbot interjected softly and curiously, leaning forward to address the body clearly. They come into our world with no knowledge. They do not even attempt to learn our ways before they criticize our millennia-strong society, trying to change it into their own flawed world. Our traditions and ways were created and observed to embrace and celebrate the magic we were honored with. Her small speech received a brief but resounding standing ovation. I agree, milady, he said to her and the rest of the aristocrats after the applause died down. I agree completely and utterly. This leads me back to my point. There is a deep-seated conflict at the heart of our society that is not fixed with by defanging one or two heads of the Hydra. There is a Muggle-born heiress and a half-blood lord among us. He declared. There were shouts of disbelief and some negative sentiments, and both of them could wipe the floor with most of you. He yelled above them. There was uproar. Harry could see Hermione becoming more and more distressed by the abuse raining down on them. Hold in there a little longer, love. Where did that come from? He violently shook away those thoughts. It was neither the time nor the place for them. But we are not here, he channeled more magic and a mild sonorous charm to his voice. We are not here to measure wands or magical levels. He pointed to himself and Hermione, represent a fundamental issue with our society that starts in this very chamber, is used and perpetuated by Dumbledore and Riddle, and has spread like an epidemic through our society. I, the orphaned, half-blood lord and heir to multiple houses, did not know how to behave in our society. I was left floundering. He threw a furious look at the indifferent-looking Dumbledore. And purposefully ignorant. My first actual introduction to the heir of another house was a shameful and horrendous mishap, to which Lord Draco Malfoy can attest, and it led to years of unnecessary rivalry and ultimately to unnecessary bloodshed. Harry placed a fist over his heart and bowed to the blonde as an apologetic equal. The chamber was silent once more. The surprise that flickered across the B's face was gone before the rest of the chamber turned to him in shock. Malfoy nodded regally in return. They both knew what Harry said to be completely fabricated. Their introduction in the train had been preceded by their encounter in Madame Malkin's shop, and Lucius Malfoy's death had absolutely nothing to do with his rivalry with Draco Malfoy. Harry was keeping his promise to Malfoy. He just hoped the B's understood. This was Malfoy's chance to throw off the shroud of negativity currently shrouding his family's name. It was not only his introduction. Lord Potter lacked in the knowledge of all manners and matters befitting someone of his station. It was an atrocity and outrage. Harry nodded his agreement and thanks. His words were given a bit more weight with the support of a centuries pure lord. Hermione had suggested that he might want to distance himself from Malfoy during this session and use Sirius instead. Harry had decided against it. Sirius' connection to House Potter was well known and would be expected. He also knew that Malfoy wouldn't object to anything he proposed. Hermione still saw Malfoy as the foul-mouthed teen, but Harry knew the B's was thinking like the lord of his house, just as I would. It was assumed, Lady Abbot, my fellow lords and ladies, that I knew something when I dressed, acted, or reacted in ways not befitting someone of my station, of someone wishing to be a part of this world. As Lady Abbot states, it was believed that I was being deliberately rude, self-alienating, rebellious, spiteful, etc. I simply was not educated, informed, or aware yet. You react to our lack of knowledge with hatred and ostracizing. The silence was impressive. Harry loved it. We, half-bloods and first-generational witches and wizards, are not adequately informed. There are no books on family magic or ways. Most families wisely pass this information on directly to their children. Yet there is no one to teach us. We are not taught at Hogwarts. Dumbledore has violently protested an introduction to magical culture course, providing the proper literature, updating the history of magic curriculum, and other means to assimilate the unfortunate and ignorant entrants to our society. He injected more magic into his voice. He could feel the strain on his vocal cords, but he knew he had to push forward. Our society is hemorrhaging. Entrant classes at Hogwarts are 70 to 90% first-generational and half-blooded witches and wizards, yet almost all of them leave our society for more welcoming and prepared societies on the continent. And in the USA we lose numerous potential healers, aurors, store managers, inventors, professors, creative minds, even heirs and family heads every year as they find themselves confronted with a society that ignores, misunderstands and viciously spurns them. He released the magic, and the room breathed a bit more easily. Several looked thoughtful, considering his accusations. Riddle was aware of this, having lived these circumstances himself as a half-blooded heir of Slytherin. Dumbledore actively supported this system because it left him able to favor a few and seem the light Lord Savior to the rest. He, just like his dark counterpart, recruits actively from those blind enough to not see beyond their own hate. He saw a flicker of worry in the old man's eyes. Yes, we got him, and I'm sure his trial will reveal that and much more. Our society cannot take much more, Harry said in all but a whisper. Do you not feel magic crying out as we kill one another, as we reject and abandon many of our own? Do you not feel her turmoil as so many of our youth leave our shores for better futures elsewhere? Harry made his way to Hermione. This young lady is my best friend, Hermione Granger. Her father was a potions prodigy at the age of 8. He was the heir of the Dagworth Granger legacy. He is also a squib. He was booted into the non-magical world where he sired the beautiful and intelligent woman beside me. There was little response to this declaration, most likely since most of the families did the same with squibs. She is the top of her class and already considered the greatest witch of our generation. This chamber immediately recognized her as the heir of the Dagworth Grangers, and he gestured to her chair. Yet many of your children, grandchildren even, call her a mudblood. To her face or behind her back. Lady Abbott looked at Hermione with shock and tears in her eyes as if she would storm down and wrap the girl in her arms. Harry made a mental note to look up her history. He had a feeling that the Lady Abbott was somehow related to the Dagworth Grangers. He signaled to Hermione through applied pressure on her arm that he was done and that they could make their way up the stairs. So, tell me who is correct, the unfounded bias and hatred you pass along to your progeny, or Lady Magic herself? So, no, Chief Witch Marchbanks and Minister Longbottom, I do not believe the trial of the old man before us should be the main focus of our session. We need to look at the academic and emigration statistics, consider our laws where need be, look at the failures within our educational institution, and then, he paused dramatically as he reached his seat, and only then, can we be assured that the destruction of our society, perpetuated by Dumbledore and Riddle, is stopped and remedied. Anything less would an insult to the very values we are sworn to uphold. Chief Witch Marchbanks' eyes lit up with a fire Harry had never seen in them before. It was she who suggested to Harry a few months prior that a sweeping change needed to occur, starting with the laws and education. Otherwise magical England would be no more in a few decades. Harry vividly remembered a stack of parchment in her office that she had referred to as her Plan B pile, for overhauling the education system. Harry knew that if she brought it out that they would have a rather long session before them. He sat down in his seat and Hermione in hers. I call for a revision to the agenda for this session. Let us tackle the issues of our society, do our duty to Lady Magic. He gave Dumbledore a scorching look, and then pumped this cretin so full of veritaserum that he sings like a drunken siren. Hear, hear, Malfoy shouted, beginning the avalanche of support that broke through the silencing wards of the chamber. Hermione leaned over to Harry after the Chief Witch restored order and called for a vote on Harry's suggestion. It was a quick landslide vote in support of Harry's proposal. No one could come up with a similarly powerful counter-argument, and no one had the popularity to go against, or wanted to be seen as going against, Harry, and education reform, or against the will of magic herself. You were spectacular, she gushed. It was so electrifying. It is always like this. Harry grabbed her hand and chuckled as he drank a sip of water from a flask. No, I rarely speak. It is not important to speak at every full meeting. It's a quality over quantity thing. I think we are all more active in smaller sessions. He thought about telling her that more was usually accomplished in smaller sessions since there was usually less grandstanding and politicizing, but he was distracted by crescendoing, booming laughs from the accused chair. Well done, Harry, well done indeed. The old man boomed. And so begins the senseless tautology, another provocative and stimulating speech. If I could applaud, I would. His sarcasm could be cut with a blunt knife. Although Harry could not see his face, he could tell that Dumbledore had dropped his grandfather act. Unfortunately, I am needed at Hogwarts. I am the only wizard alive who can handle the wards. Only because you changed the ward schemas, Harry said strongly from his seat. Dumbledore laughed once more. That is correct, Harry. 10 points to Gryffindor. With a shout of triumph, the old man broke free of his shackles and stood up to the surprise of the Wizengamot. I bid you all much luck with your session, Fox," he declared, lifting his arms in a rather dramatic pose. "Two can play that game." He had planned to pull this trick at the subsequent press conference, but he did not mind doing it a bit early. Harry threw Hermione a meaningful look. She quickly read his mind and murmured a few words in Latin, and Harry jumped up from his seat, his cane elongating into a golden staff and his cloak billowing behind him. His entire being glowed a light gold, and he released an impressive amount of magic to fill the room. The mixture of his magic dimming the torches lighting the room and Hermione's creative runes that FC had tweaked were really a sight to behold. "Fox, creature of light, heed the words of magic's blessed," he declared to the fiery avian as it made its appearance. "Your master has defiled with his dark deeds the very bond that has summoned you. No longer is he a leader of light. Honor your existence and leave him to his judgment, or, so help me, I will use every last residue of magic in my being to send you to the furnace from whence you sprang." Fox, the clever bird he was, hovered in midair just out of reach of his human companion, and fire flashed directly in front of Harry. He stared into Harry's eyes, and for a moment, Harry believed the bird would ignore his bluff and make a fool of him. He had no spells in his arsenal to combat a purely magical being. Sirius had his wand trained on Dumbledore to place a few tracking charms on him in case Fox took him away. Moments passed as the bird seemed to stare into Harry's mind and soul. "Fox!" Dumbledore bellowed in anger and desperation. Harry reached out with a glowing hand and petted the beautiful bird. "Release yourself from your dark burden and find someone who deserves your presence," Harry whispered to the sentient creature. The bird bowed its head to Harry and flashed from the room, leaving its former master to his trial and standing in shock. Harry quickly summoned the wand out of Dumbledore's shaking hands and stunned the man in quick succession. Two Aurors and Lady Bones herself rushed forward to check Dumbledore for any other surprises and shackled him back in his chair. Harry felt the wand reach out to his magic and declare him its new master. "It can't be." He stowed the whispering wand away. He would have to give it to Milton and FC to be sure. "Chief Witch Marchbanks," Harry called out to the gaping woman, "I believe we can vote on a new agenda now." Hermione deactivated her spells, and Harry pulled in his magic. He sat back in his seat as the room exploded in questions and shouts once more. Exhausted, Harry and Hermione exited the flow of Potter Manor many hours later. "We make a good team," his friend said, stifling a yawn. Harry could only nod in response. Their actions, theatrical and dramatic as they might have been, saw to it that half-blooded, first-generational and even mixed race witches and wizards were now guaranteed wizarding education. Upon their 10th birthday they would have an orientation year that better prepared them for the British Magical Society. Discrimination based on blood, race or any other factor would be penalized by laws, the drawing up of which Harry and Hermione had actively participated in. Hogwarts would be a completely different place come January, when most of the laws came into effect and Hogwarts reopened as heir of Gryffindor. Harry had received the duty to take control of the wards with the assistance of a few curse breakers of his choice and pass the wards on to the next elected headmaster. McGonagall would have been a shoo-in if her loyalty to Dumbledore weren't so deep and questionable. "I can't wait for the new classes," Hermione exclaimed suddenly, though not at surprising Harry. After clearing up some misunderstandings regarding the financial status of the school, and promising to dig deep into the endless Slytherin and Gryffindor coffers, Chief Witch Marchbanks revealed a list of over 10 magical classes, 7 magical electives and 6 non-magical courses she believed Hogwarts should offer in order to be able to compete with other world-renowned schools. With her century-old networking and experience, and Harry's fame, they would most likely be able to staff each of the classes. First gens, regardless of age, would be given a heritage test to see if they had roots in the magical society. All students would all be required to attend a wizarding customs course. Harry and Lady Marchbanks would meet with a small committee to go over all the changes in more depth before the end of the year. Hermione had been pulled in even without Harry's insisting. She had impressed more than a few of the stuffy aristocrats with her intelligence when she was called on for her opinion as the only first-gen present. It was also decided that Lady Marchbanks, Sirius, and Harry solely due to the wards, would head the interim leadership of school until the Board of Governors was revised according to Hogwarts charter and the next headmaster was sworn in. Harry had a feeling that Sirius was setting himself up for the position. He could only imagine the havoc his godfather was planning to unleash onto the school. It had been rather jarring to Harry that neither Dumbledore nor the board had actually been sworn in as mandated by the founders. They merely inherited were handpicked for or usurped their positions. Of course, the school has gone to the dumps if no one is forced to uphold the school's charter. Dumbledore's admissions under Veritaserum had rendered everyone in the room shocked and disgusted. His manipulations of their society ran so deep that even his avid supporters had turned their backs on him by the end of his 2-hour trial. Most of them had to, since Dumbledore's confession implicated them for doing his bidding. Dumbledore had wanted nothing more than the complete and total control over magical Britain. He had schemed and plotted since the beginning of the century to control every walk of life and install in all future generations utter subservience to him. It was frightening how close he had been to succeeding. And he would have if my family hadn't brought me to Australia, Harry had thought. Then Dumbledore even validated this mere moments afterward. He admitted that he regretted nothing but not keeping a tighter leash on Harry. He revealed his plans to brainwash him and mold him back into the malleable and disposable figure he needed to accomplish his goals. Merlin, FC and Uncle Virgil were completely right with their assumptions of Dumbledore motives. I should have never have doubted them. Are you still thinking about Dumbledore? She asked, reading him like an open book. He opened the door to his study for her. I just can't wrap my mind around how many lives he's destroyed. Many of his manipulations began in the 1910s. I know hundreds, if not thousands, of Mug first generationals have left due to his actions and inaction. Dumbledore revealed one his more hair-raising schemes, the utter destruction of the old and traditional families. He had pretty much sealed his fate when those words passed his lips. Dumbledore had known from international research, which he later had banned in England, that first-generational witches and wizards were rarely new magical houses. They were usually the magical offspring of squib lines. He simply refused to educate or inform them of their heritage, just as he had done with Harry, so that the lines never became strong again. He turned a blind eye to discrimination at Hogwarts as a professor, deputy headmaster, and even subtly encouraged it as headmaster, and the rampant prejudices ensured that the first gens turned their backs on the wizarding world. He even regretted not assisting Grindelwald and Riddle in killing off more houses. He hated their rituals, their traditions, and secretly wanted their power and prestige. It was jolting just how sick the man was. I hate to think about how Hagrid and Remus will react to the news tomorrow. Harry hung their outer robes on a stand by the door before he summoned his pensieve. He quickly removed the memories of the last few days so that he could review them more thoroughly tomorrow. His great-grandfather's portrait had instructed him to do so daily, but he found that it hindered his occlumency meditation. For some reason he made a mental note to talk to Uncle Milton about that in the wand in his pocket. Who could have known that Dumbledore only allowed certain mixed-race wizards into Hogwarts to increase his followers and spy network? She said, helping herself to some reports and letters on his desk as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Harry paused in his memory extraction to observe her. She looked absolutely gorgeous as she pondered and read. He could watch her all day. Harry, she said loudly, trying to catch his attention. He shook his head. Sorry, what did you say? She rolled her eyes and gestured to a letter. You plan to release a study on your Patronus. I thought all of the Dementors were destroyed in Azkaban. Unfortunately not. That was only one colony, and the only colony close to Britain. There are some in Russia and North America. Many governments would like to rid themselves of the demons, but they don't have a way to do so. Our colony had been the most docile, and the most researched due to their human-friendly nature, if you can believe that. Hermione gave him a look nearing adoration. She bit her lip in the say, "Wyest way, unbelievable. May I read the article before you submit it?" Harry extracted the last memory and watched it swim for a second as he gathered his up the courage. He walked around his desk and laid his hands on her hips. You can even co-author it." He raised a hand to stop her protests. "I know you feel left out sometimes, even uncertain by everything happening around me, but today proved something to me." She stood as if entranced as he slowly removed the parchment out of her hands. "What?" she whispered. He took another step toward her, leaving only inches of air between them. "We make an awesome team." He was barely able to keep his fingers from shaking as he tucked some of her soft, vanilla-scented hair behind her ear. I agree," she said, her voice much different than it was moments before. In the decades that followed, both Harry and Hermione denied being the first to key. The other, it was one memory that neither of them reviewed in their pensieve, since it was the one mystery they wanted to keep unsolved. The key just felt magical. Harry was unable to keep his magic contained. It danced around them as if celebrating the key. His hands found her hips once more and her arms wrapped his neck. "Why did we ever wait to do this? Harry was deeply disappointed as they ended the key, to get air. "Please stay tonight," he begged, his voice deep and sultry. His beautiful Hermione blushed at the proposition. "I can't, my father's birthday is tomorrow. It will be the first time I celebrate with them since before I left for Hogwarts." But she bit her lip again. "She doesn't know what she's doing to me. You can join me if you want." "Yes," he said without hesitation, "only if I can go as your boyfriend." She jumped into his arms and stared at him in shock. Yes. Yes, of course." It was Harry who initiated the heated key. That followed. All thoughts about Dumbledore and Hogwarts disappeared as Harry's magic resumed its dance of joy around the key, dotting pair. Henriette Potter looked out upon the wintry, fairy tale lands that, in mere months, would be hers. The Malfoys might be a relatively new family as far as the British wizard nobility were concerned, but their sense of style and architecture were unmatched as far as she was concerned. The grounds she gazed upon were so spectacular that Henriette lost her breath. The immaculate gardens were arranged in circles around the manor. Paths of beautiful gray and green stone separated the concentric rows of statues and magical plants. The artistically trimmed hedges grew higher and the trees taller as the rows closed at the end of the manor wards. "Wonderful, isn't it?" the Dowager Malfoy said as she entered the gorgeous and sweeping terrace. Henriette gave her elegantly dressed future mother-in-law a deep curtsy. No family pours more energy into the aesthetic appeal and comfort of their grounds. Henriette nodded. The woman had aptly read her mind. Lady Malfoy gazed sharply at her. "It almost softens the blow of being essentially sold and bartered away for political gain." The words were so soft that they could have been whispered, "Doesn't it?" Henriette gasped at the insinuation. "My lady. I never." The woman gave her a grim smile. "Come, dear girl who leaves their own betrothal party before the guests do." Despite her rudimentary occlumency, Henriette still blushed. It was definitely considered bad form, but she couldn't bear being around Harry at the moment. His bright eyes and cheerful demeanor sickened her to her stomach. She had managed to keep up the farce for a while, but she realized she needed fresh air after dinner. "I apologize if my actions insulted you or the family in any way. I needed a moment." Lady Malfoy's smile grew. "It is not widely known or discussed, but I did the same." Henriette gaped in a rather unladylike manner. "No one ever told me that." "How could they? All present were sworn to silence by my father, which Lord Potter is most likely doing as we speak. To preserve the family honor, familia super omnia," Henriette added unhappily to herself. It was only months ago that she was prepared to sacrifice her cousin for the sake of the family, yet now, with the tables turned, Henriette was definitely not happy to be on the receiving end. Karma had spited her completely and utterly. It was clear to her that she had been released from one cage only to be assigned to another. Still, there was no doubt in her mind that she could still push forward with her plans for making a name for herself with or without the ball and chain she would soon call husband, Draco Lucius Malfoy. She was not disappointed with his manners, intelligence or looks. He seemed well-groomed and confident, both of which Harry had been lacking when she first met him. As tradition dictated, Henriette and her future husband had not been alone unsupervised since she had arrived 3 hours ago. She had to sit with the ladies while her mother and Lady Malfoy led discussions. Lord Malfoy had greeted her with respect and genuine appreciation. Even with an acceptable amount of lust, Henriette still couldn't shake the butterflies that his initial look sent straight to her belly. "It was to save face, of course," Lady Malfoy continued wistfully, yanking Henriette out of her thoughts. "My eldest sisters had been arranged to respectable men. Bellatrix, my eldest sister, was promptly married off to a scion of the Lestranges after she left Hogwarts, and Andromeda was to marry Lucius." A pained look crossed her face. Andromeda had other plans, however. She had fallen in love with the mud. "Excuse me, first-generational wizard Theodore Tonks." Henriette watched with bated breath as the woman bared her soul. It was a scandal of the highest proportions. A black seduced by someone of lower blood. Oh, how the newspapers ran with the story. Father attacked Mr. Tonks and nearly landed in Azkaban for the use of an unforgivable. She gave a harsh laugh. "The Malfoys were implacable. It was my own dear mother who decided to offer me to the Malfoy heir with a sizable dowry and a bit of land in southern France." The flawless fingers gripped the ivory railing in visible anger. "At first I rebelled, and was thoroughly punished." Her laugh was as cold as the air around them. "It was after my loveless wedding and before the birth of my son that I realized the power I held over my husband and over the family that sold me off to him. I seized it. She spread her arms out in the direction of the grounds, her elegant dress and robes cascading around her. This is my work, every stone and every painted inch of this manor is my masterpiece, it is the talk of the world. As is the woman who made it, even my blood family looked up at me, and I control every aspect of this house to his dying day. My husband did not know all of the secrets of this place, of my hand, of my stronghold. Henriette heard doors opening and alcohol-tinged voices she made to interrupt the woman, but Lady Malfoy's eyes burned with passion. You two will have to play the game, yet your battle is already half won. You do not have to decide if you will be a quiet, weak-minded extension of your husband's fancy or a dangerous shadow that is bound to him but can be larger than him if the lighting is right. You will not have to fight as I have. She turned to Henriette, her eyes burning into those of the future Lady Malfoy. My son is a good man, I made sure of that. He is, however, only half of the man he can be. It was you who pulled House Potter out of murky waters and into a golden age. It was you who worked on Lord Potter and made him into the great man he is now. I followed any information on you in the newspapers. I observed your work, your changes and your abilities from afar. You worked miracles on your Lord Potter and you worked miracles in his stead. There is a reason why I agreed with that outrageous bridal price. She sneered briefly. Henriette wondered briefly if she was angry because Henriette's bridal price was much larger than hers, that Henriette had a bridal price rather than a dowry, or simply due to the amount. I see potential in you, in your style, in the ways in which you can make Draco into a great man. There was a brief moment when Henriette swallowed a question that burned in her throat. What if I don't want to? Soon, however, she weighed the potential and potency of her plans of revenge against Henry with a trusting man on her side, and she considered the disadvantages of working against her future husband and his obviously powerful, and power-hungry, mother. The political side of her mind was not delighted. Even if she led Draco to greatness, his mother would be remembered as the woman behind House Malfoy. That just will not do, she thought with a small mental smirk. Her mind rapidly laid plans and counterplans. Henriette had been the woman behind Lord Potter. She would be the next Lady Malfoy. She would show the old bee on how one led a house. She gave an almost indiscernible nod just as her future husband entered the terrace with a deep and equally low bow to both of them, showing that he respected them equally. The smile on Lady Malfoy's face cracked ever so slightly. May I escort my fiancé to the sitting room? I believe Lord Potter has a few words before the connaissance begins. His confidence faltered slightly as he offered her his arm. Henriette made her decision. If her future husband already considered her on par his mother, then she only had minimal work ahead of her. I can work with this. Your gardening is simply magnificent, Dowager Malfoy. Perhaps I can have my Lord Potter make an offer regarding some of the Potter properties, she asked as she took Lord Malfoy's offered arm. The brief, pinched look on the older woman's face was all the reaction she received to her dig. That is not a bad idea, mother. It would give you something to do once Henriette becomes familiar with the routine of a Lady Malfoy, her future husband said instantly, oblivious to the tension in the air. Your landscaping skills are unmatched. He nodded to his mother, who curtsied silently in response. She gave Henriette a small sneer when her son was not looking. Henriette gave a tight nod in return to her competitor, but inside she was glowing and appreciating the feel of her first success against her future mother-in-law. Regardless of how beautiful Lady Malfoy's manor grounds were, Henriette's aspirations were above and beyond that. The future Lady Malfoy would be known for more than a mere manor and a green thumb. Harry looked up from his report on his Patronus and Dementors to see his Uncle Virgil standing in the doorway. The report was set to be published with Hermione and the former Azkaban employee, Harrow's Carrot. As co-authors, Harry wondered how publishers and magizoologists worldwide were going to react to the revolutionary findings of 2 half-bloods and a first-gen. Carrot was worried about the reception. He had written Harry nearly on a daily basis, but Harry reassured the man that it would get published in every major magizoology publication worldwide. He was sure his name would carry enough weight to at least bring the paper into consideration. I hope it gets published on Valentine's Day. It would be a good present for Hermione. Regina and Lester should be arriving any minute now. I don't expect Percy to be on time. There isn't a punctual bone in his 95-year-old body. Harry smiled as best as he could despite the man's humor and radiant excitement. A strange awkwardness and distance had spoiled all of their interactions since his uncle's arrival 2 days prior. I wonder how much of this tension is due to the gathering and how much is due to my actions toward Henriette. It had been over 60 years since a Potter gathering had been held. 1930 had been a crazy year, Harry had been told the tragic, double deaths of Virgil's brother, heir presumptive Hardwin Potter Jr. and his father Lord Hardwin Potter within days of each other almost overshadowed the subsequent wedding of Harry's great-grandfather, Charles Potter, and his ascension to Lord Potter. Uncle Virgil had explained to him that the family never found the time to meet again due to Grindelwald's war. Most of Uncle Virgil's brothers and sisters had been more than happy to stay away from the manor that their father had darkened in their childhoods. Much like Henriette, despite her obvious anger, was playing the part of the lady of the manor, and yet avoiding Harry at all costs. Harry had asked the elves to release Henriette 3 days before the connaissance at Malfoy Manor, to put her in her bed in the ladies' wing while she slept. He had a feeling that her aggression was at least partially because of that. He saw Henriette during breakfast some mornings, and that was it. She pretty much ignored his presence and gave Harry the cold shoulder whenever their paths crossed, barely maintaining a polite face around him. She had originally agreed to handle the decorations, and Harry would take care of the coordination, making sure that there was enough food, linens, potions and space for everyone. Now, Harry was doing it all. Henriette had spent most of her time, as much time as possible, outside of Potter Manor. She hopped from gala to gala and from event to event with her new fiancé. Harry was happy that she was gone. If he were honest with himself, even if it meant more work for him, he was also happy that she and Malloy were hitting it off so well. He even enjoyed reading about their exploits since the connaissance in the newspapers, opening up an orphanage for magical children, regardless of blood, breed or family name, was a thoughtful and unique idea. Calling it the Potter Malfoy Home for Displaced Children, however, was just tacky. Nevertheless, the press ate it up like ice cream. Henriette and Malfoy had been everyone's favorite topic since their connaissance, as the purebloods called the initial meeting between fiancés in a contractual marriage went public. The initial public reactions of fury and disgust had quickly changed 1 or 2 days after the news broke. Malfoy had invited the families with connections to the Malfoys, the Potters, the Blacks, as well as Lady Black and any other living Blacks, to the engagement party. Harry was happy to see that few of the Blacks were interested in Malfoy's upcoming marriage. Harry was already heir Black, meaning none of the Blacks even batted an eye at Malfoy, a former heir presumptive. Sirius, Lady Black, Lady Malfoy, Cedrilla Weasley, née Black, and Cladora Longbottom, née Black, were the only born Blacks present, and Lady Black only came to gather blackmail material. When it was announced that Malfoy would be marrying Henriette, all of the purebloods' masks fell apart in shock. Harry and Sirius, who had only come to see that particular reaction, had shared a good laugh about it. Once the evening had ended, Madame Bones, shattering her monocle, had sent Sirius into a giggling frenzy. The usually unflappable woman had recovered quickly to repair the broken glass and smack Sirius upside the head. None of the purebloods had seen it coming, and when Lady Black inquired about the bride price, Harry had been forced to hide his smile with his teacup. He was sure that Lord Knott had had a conniption along with Lady Parkinson and Madame Longbottom. Unfortunately, that was the only highlight of the last week. Harry had thrown himself into the preparations for the upcoming wedding of Andrew Edgar Jr. and Maeve de la Cruz at Potter Manor and the Potter Yuletide gathering. Jonas and his father were having difficulties liquidating some of the Potter assets which had been frozen by vindictive goblins. Jonas was still leaving the manor frequently, searching for his snake-faced lord, and Harry wondered if the blonde would survive his encounter with his enraged lord. "I don't think I would cry for him if he succeeds in finding the bastard." He had met almost twice a week with Lady Marchbanks, who picked his brain for solutions to Hogwarts' tumultuary habits of instructing and learning, as she quite eloquently deemed it. Dumbledore's trial and the subsequent publication of The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore by Rita Skeeter and Bathilda Bagshot had catapulted Harry into the limelight nationally and internationally for being the man who defanged the vicious, almost tyrant. Harry had even been encouraged by Minister Longbottom to act for Britain as the youngest representative ever to the International Confederation of Wizard, to be a figurehead for the downtrodden British masses. Harry reluctantly agreed, only if Hermione could join him as his counsel. "And we thought the Wizengamot was horrible." Harry had the feeling that the minimum membership age for the ICW was nigh on 100. The representatives from Germany and France, both of whom looking as though they were 2 steps from dust, even came up to him and told him that they knew his great-great-grandfather Hardwin Potter personally. Hours of posturing and haggling over international trade routes, commodities and other rather insignificant matters had not done much to lift Harry's mood. He was sure that even old Binns could have made the meeting livelier. All in all, Harry was simply exhausted and had been running on 2 pepper-up potions and 1 time turning per day. His only ray of light was the beautiful brunette who frequented his manor and became his rock following her father's birthday a month ago. Uncle Virgil gave a small sigh, drawing Harry out his thoughts, and closed the door to the room. Harry realized in the last moment that his uncle was still in the room. "You seem stressed of late." The understatement of the century. Harry placed the Patronus report on the large stack of completed paperwork. Its partner pile of uncompleted paperwork had seemed to defy the laws of gravity before he sat down. Harry knew he would be using time magic twice today just to stay afloat. "I probably already am." He was pretty sure that his liberal use of Potter time magic over the past few weeks had taken its toll of his physical age. He just felt older. "I am managing," Harry said simply, leaning back in his chair. Uncle Virgil jerked back in shock. He gave Harry an assessing glance. "Every time I see you, you sound more and more like your great-grandfather," he whispered. He too sat in that very chair after taking the lordship following our father's and Hardy's deaths, with the very same look and posture, and gave the very same answer. Harry almost rolled his eyes. I'm sure he had other issues than fixing a millennium-old school with an outdated and academically lacking curriculum, dealing with the national and international press, a Vila wedding, a gathering of over 100 Potters, a deviant lady regnant, vindictive goblins and endless paperwork. Virgil gave a soft smile. "You'd be surprised, I think." Harry had barely swallowed his snarky response when Virgil suddenly pitched over the desk with a look of pain etched on his face. "Are you all right?" Harry jumped up. Uncle Virgil lifted a hand to halt Harry. He braced himself on the desk to steady himself. Harry summoned the chair from before the fireplace and gently guided his great-granduncle into it. Harry ran a shaky hand through his hair. He hesitated as he contemplated the ramifications of his next actions, but he charged forward. He expanded his senses with the family magic and examined the man before him. Uncle Virgil gasped as the family magic roughly, yet without any true aggression, pulsed through him. That was the worst part about using family magic on family members. There was no way to be sneaky with it. The family members' connection to the family magic alerted them instantly when it was being used in their presence. Harry received an immediate signal from the family magic. He gasped and pulled the magic back with a snap. Uncle Virgil sighed. "Henry, when were you planning to tell us that you have a deadly curse slowly sapping away your life energy?" Harry interjected angrily. "I wasn't," the man said simply. "It is a rather benign curse, a dark reminder of my days in the Force." Harry opened his mouth to ask a follow-up question when the door to his study opened silently. "Henry, everyone is waiting for you in the main hall. What's going on here?" Uncle Virgil gave Harry a warning look as he made a show of dusting himself off. He stood and made his way towards the door. "Thank you for listening to the concerns of an old man, Henry." Harry swallowed his anger and sadness. He nodded curtly and made to follow when he saw the stack of paperwork on his desk disappear. A small note lay in place of the paperwork. 4 hours, it read. Harry turned to his uncles. "I'll be done in a few moments." As they departed and the door closed behind them, Harry went into the private study next to the Lord's study and gathered the family magic around himself and, with the appropriate time point in mind, pushed himself into the past. He grabbed a pepper-up potion from his private stash and summoned the stack of paperwork with a sigh. It was days like this that he missed, only having to worry about school work, Quidditch and Voldemort. Hermione adjusted her dress for the umpteenth time in the mirror. She had just finished her makeup. She wasn't allowed to touch her hair for fear of Mauve, Harry's soon-to-be cousin of some convoluted degree. Purebloods, honestly. Who counted upwards fifth cousins nowadays? The bee-owned beauty was eyeing Hermione suspiciously out of the corner of her eye as she added the final touches to her own dress. Hermione sighed and gave up. "Here, let me," the bee-owned said before she fixed the shoulder of the dress, and, "ladies don't sigh." Hermione caught herself before she rolled her eyes. Ladies don't do that either, of course. Despite her character being completely against pretenses and putting on airs, Hermione had had to remind herself multiple times over the past weeks that she was doing it for a good cause. She and Harry were going to change the world from within. Mauve, the princess-like daughter of a very important line of Spanish Vila, had taken it upon herself to give the woman at Henry's side a crash course in the behavior befitting someone of her station. Mauve really just wanted a break from planning her wedding, which was tomorrow. Hermione had spent more time with the bee-owned in Potter Manor than she had with her boyfriend of a month. Hermione remembered feeling goosebumps rise on her skin at the hidden, albeit unintentional, insult to her behavior and upbringing. She could hardly turn down 2 weeks of daily lessons. "Done. You look fabulous." The B-owned gushed. Hermione took a look at herself in the mirror and couldn't help but agree. Her hair, straight and voluminous, flowed over her shoulders like silk string, and the dress. Mauve had ordered her a gorgeous, floor-length, backless, wine-red dress. The dress exuded and demanded a level of confidence that Hermione lacked. Despite her discomfort of showing off her womanly curves, Hermione had to admit that the one-shoulder dress still managed to fit her personality just as well as it did her body. "I look like a celebrity." The evening dress featuring a ruched bodice with a keyhole opening on the single shoulder strap she turned slightly, the dress swishing elegantly around her multicolored, glittering beaded, or those diamonds, straps crossed her body, making her feel slimmer than she truly was in the right areas. The little train attached to the trumpet-style, split skirt added a seductive flair to the ensemble. After a few moments of speechlessness, Mauve gave a beautiful laugh. "I told you will be a showstopper today. Tomorrow is my day," the B-owned said in a faux haughty tone and a ridiculously obvious wink. This time Hermione couldn't hide the roll of her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you, Mauve. Wow." The blonde waved away her gratitude and took a closer look at Hermione's attempt to apply makeup. "Little is more for makeup." She spelled away some of the mascara and the rouge. "You are lucky that you have a great, healthy complexion. You definitely don't look like the rest of those pasty Britons." Hermione frowned as it became clear to her that the beads on her dress were in fact diamonds of various colors. "This dress must have cost a fortune." "Not at all. I added it to the expenses for the wedding, and it isn't like you can't wear it again. I'm pretty sure Henry will want you to wear it to the next ministry ball or gala, or whatever they call it." Hermione blushed crimson. "That is, if he doesn't rip it off of you tonight." "Mauve." The blonde turned away, laughing. Hermione had never had many girls as friends, or many friends at all. Her studious habits had isolated her from the Gryffindor girls in her year. Her high-achieving mentality had also kept girls at Hogwarts away, besides Ginny, who helped her with makeup for last year's Yuletide ball and sent her a rather cold congratulatory letter on her new relationship with Harry. Hermione interacted with few girls her age. Her use of the time turner in her 3rd year and her death-defying adventures with Harry made her mature much quicker than the other girls. Mauve was the first woman Hermione had ever built up a mentor-girlfriend-like relationship with, and I definitely don't regret it. The B-owned was aiming to get her masters in charms, transfiguration and defense simultaneously. While the combination itself was not unusual, it was nearly unheard of to aim for all three at the same time and spoke to Mauve's intelligence. Hermione thoroughly enjoyed having intellectual conversations about ladies of houses, magical theory, history and customs with Mauve. She was sure she would have been lost without the blonde, since purebloods trained each other in their ways rather than writing it all in books. "And Harry has been too busy to have more than a 30 minutes conversation with me lately." Hermione opened up to Mauve about her relationship with Harry, however, and regretted it almost daily ever since. Mauve just couldn't believe that she and Harry hadn't taken their relationship to the next level. She took to making small say-ul comments whenever she could. Once she even discussed the proper ways of polishing a wand, and once Hermione caught on to the innuendo, had Hermione blushing for days whenever she saw Harry. With a few spells for final touches and to keep everything in place, Mauve suddenly bustled them out of the ladies' chambers to where the gathering would be held. Hermione hastily greeted the Potters she knew. Along the way everyone seemed to be rushing in the same direction. Even though there had been no mention of a start time for the gathering, it was as if they all instinctively knew that something would be happening soon. I wonder if that has something to do with the family magic. The butterflies resting in her stomach returned suddenly. It hit her that she was attending a Potter family event. She had made the difficult decision to attend without letting Harry know, just to surprise him. Her presence would send a message to all present. She would be attending as a future lady of the house. Mauve made it very clear to her that her presence would not be interpreted in any other way. She would be making a statement, and, frankly, it scared her. What if Harry doesn't approve? What if his family doesn't approve? Harry had pointed out many instances where it was obvious to him that his family had been pushing him and his cousin, Henriette, together. Hermione hoped that it was just a fleeting decision. As she hurried with everyone else through the rapidly filling hallway, a small part of her mind reminded her that she shouldn't care. She was sure that it didn't matter to Harry what his family thought about his love life. He made that very clear to her after a few biting articles in the Daily Prophet about her assuming the Dagworth Granger heirship and the possibility of a future Potter-Dagworth Granger marriage. The Potter-Malfoy engagement had only satisfied their gossip thirst for so long before the vultures moved on to their next targets. Hermione suddenly remembered why she hated wearing heels when she was forced to stop suddenly as someone emerged from a side room and nearly crashed into her. She froze as she and the other person made eye contact. Mauve's hand on her arm tightened suddenly, and Hermione remembered her manners. She gave a slightly abrupt, yet deep and full, curtsy in respect to the girl she had so hated for many months. There was an uncomfortable beat where Henriette, on the arm of her blonde fiancé, seemed to hesitate. The raven-haired beauty gave a similarly deep curtsy as her fiancé responded in kind with a bow. "Lady Potter Malfoy," Hermione said crisply. "Heiress Dagworth Granger," both Henriette and her soon-to-be husband intoned in the most expressionless voices they could muster without sounding demeaning. Hermione noted that the two looked rather dashing in their turquoise ensemble despite their slightly pinched, holier-than-thou looks. They turned at once with a look of indifference and headed off. "Well done, Hermione," Mauve murmured as they continued their trek to the ballroom. Hermione waved her wand at her foot and merely sighed as the ache in her left foot gradually receded. Her thoughts turned from Henriette's behavior and her unsettling, yet apparently fitting, upcoming marriage flitted to Harry quickly. She had tried arguing with him about selling his cousin off to the highest bidder from multiple angles. Harry had been unrepentant in regard to his decision. He even went so far as to demand that Hermione no longer questioned his decision. She had fumed for days. Mauve pulled Hermione into the ballroom, and Hermione suddenly felt very small. She, like many others around her, looked at the room in awe. Harry and his cousin had turned the rather impressive room into a small winter wonderland. Enchanted icicles hung from the high ceiling and glowed white in blue. Frost and glowing fairies floated around the edges of the room. There were dozens of tables with expensive white tablecloths arranged in a circle around what Hermione assumed to be the dance floor. Each table had a large, icy bubble-like material around it. What really caught her breath were the walls. They were spelled to reflect some gorgeous, enchanting garden. Hermione recognized it moments later as the Potter Manor's snow-covered gardens. They even prepared the gardens with gazebos. Her jaw unhinged from her face as she watched a small group of children playing hide-and-seek race from a gazebo through the wall and into the room. What magic is this? She had never heard of spells that had such an effect. A small hush went through the room of mingling Potters. Everyone turned in the direction of the entrance, where Hermione also stood, transfixed. Hermione turned and found herself looking at Harry and a few elder wizards and witches. "Hermione," her green-eyed friend said softly. His eyes drank in her appearance and were filled with such emotion that the butterflies in Hermione's stomach exploded excitedly. When Harry entered the ballroom, his mind simply went on vacation. "Hermione." He managed to get out. "She looks like a red angel." A small cough from Uncle Virgil brought Harry back to the task at hand. He stepped into the ballroom, peripherally admiring the product of many months of planning and many weeks of hard work, and led the procession of Uncle Virgil, his great-granduncles Percival and Lester, and his great-grandaunt Regina to the table opposite the entrance doors. Family magic hummed happily around them, happy to have so many Potters together. The room glittered spectacularly around them. Harry could feel his magic and the wild magic join in. They reached out to every person present and interacted with each person's individual magic. A small alert went through him as the family magic mingled with that of Jonas and Malfoy. The taint of Voldemort on their magic, even more so on Jonas due to his dark mark, felt like someone had suddenly poured dirty, cold oil on him. Harry shook the feeling off as he drew close to his gorgeous girlfriend. With one arm, a swift movement and a small amount of wandless magic, he pulled Hermione gently to him without breaking stride or causing either of them to stumble. "Hello, gorgeous," he whispered hotly in her ear. Hermione sniffed slightly, briefly reminding Harry of the venerable Lady Black. "Don't think for a moment that you can pull and move me around like one of those pure-blooded trophies." Harry paled. I didn't mean to upset you, I swear." A small giggle from the brown-haired witch threw him off. "Gods, Harry. I know you didn't mean any affront. I know you better than anyone." Harry caught her throwing a brief look at a scowling Henrietta. "I wonder what happened there." He merely tightened his grip on her waist and held her close to him. Tension seemed to slide off of her shoulders, and she gave a small sigh of content. Harry gave himself a mental pat on the back. As they reached their table, his great-granduncle Percival silenced the room with a look, as was his duty as elder Potter and oldest of the Harry relatives, presenting our Lord Henry James Potter, most noble and ancient house of Potter. Blessed be this Yuletide reunion. As one, most of the room bowed or curtsied deeply. Harry swallowed the sudden lump in his throat at the 96 Potters and partners who all turned to look at him. Family magic swelled upon all in the room. We come together for the first time in decades for many reasons, Harry began with a strong, magic-infused voice. We are family, despite the distances between our homes we are one, despite our differences in opinions together, we shall bring honor for generations to come. Familia super omnia. Potters super omnia. Potters super omnia. The Potters in the room chanted as one. Let this be the first of many happy reunions. Let us dine, dance and be merry, Harry said as the family magic was released merrily. A small cheer went up from some of the children in the room as magic snow fell from the ceiling and soft music started. Harry took care in seating Hermione before claiming a seat for himself next to her. As soon as his bottom touched the chair, the room burst into activity. Children ran around. Cousins from all over the world cheerfully greeted one another and introduced their families to others. Harry smiled at the cheer in the air and relaxed into his seat. He wondered briefly if this was how Dumbledore used to feel at the head table at Hogwarts. Harry could see himself also getting used to creating an atmosphere of happiness and cheer for others. Two sets of twins, both pairs the children of Orville Jonas's brother Calder, chased a rather evasive and large snowflake in and out of the room. Harry could see his Uncle FC sneakily directing the snowflake with flicks of his wand from a nearby table. Even Henriette had dropped her scowl and was introducing Malfoy to Karl von Habsburg, the son of Harry's great-grandaunt Regina von Habsburg, née Potter. This is how it should be, he thought to himself, satisfied with the turnout and the energy in the room. Harry's attention returned to his table as Hermione and his great-grandaunt shared a loud laugh with the others. He realized briefly that dinner had been served as a crisp-looking salad waited for him. What did I miss? He asked, picking up his utensils. The mirth on Hermione's face sent a tingle of happy emotions straight through Harry. Well, after you dozed off in Harryland and neglected to introduce me to everyone. Harry ducked his head slightly in embarrassment. He grabbed Hermione's hand under the table and gave it an apologetic squeeze. She merely smiled at him in return. I introduced myself and just asked your great-great-aunt how the von Habsburgs managed to survive after World War I. Please, dear, call me Aunt Gina, his aunt said brightly. No need to make me feel older than I am. Hermione gracefully nodded her head. Harry noticed looks of acceptance pass among those present at the table. He narrowed his eyes suspiciously at his Uncle Virgil. He had a feeling that the man and his siblings were up to something. It was quite simple actually. Faking one's death does leave some rather tedious restrictions your social life, though, his aunt said with a small smirk. I found comfort in the many other magicals who had to do the same for one reason or another. Hermione's eyes were alight with curiosity. Are there really so many cases of magicals who have to fake their own deaths? Absolutely. Harry's great-granduncle, Lester Lloyd's wife, Charlotte Marie Potter, née de Chaudet, said in a distinctive, highly accented voice, how would we explain a 130-year-old like your Winston Churchill to Xenon magicals? Harry relaxed for the first time in days as Hermione took over the conversation that revolved around the interactions between the non-magical and magical worlds. Her knowledge of non-magical history was apparently rather extensive, and his relatives were rather happy to reminisce and humor her avid and thought-provoking questions. Harry barely batted an eye until after the dessert arrived, and he made to go mingle with his numerous cousins. He rolled his eyes good-humoredly as Hermione captivated the entire table in a discussion on how non-magicals viewed the mysterious origins of Grigory Rasputin, who was apparently a bastard Russian half-blood. Harry roamed the room from table to table introducing himself to many and getting life updates from those he knew on Uncle Virgil's side of the family. By the time he returned back to his table, the desert had vanished and a few couples were already dancing in the middle of the room. Many of the older individuals were enjoying a post-meal drink outside in the gazebos. Harry chuckled as he watched Uncle Virgil twirl his sister around as if they were decades younger. Hermione was not at the table. He did a search of the grand ballroom until he found her near the wall studying the magic intensively. If you want, I can show you the family enchantment, he said sidling up to her silently. Surprising to him, Hermione did not jump or react in any way to him sneaking up on her. You are not allowed to, she said in a forlorn voice. I'm not a Potter as your cousin as Henriette so kindly reminded me just now. She threw a disgusted look over her shoulder at his raven-haired cousin, who had obviously recently passed by the area. Anger passed through him. Henriette has no right to decide who is or is not considered family. She was technically correct, Harry reminded himself as he calmed down with the spell being from the cherished family grimoire. She wasn't allowed to even touch the book, let alone see the spell unless she was deemed a trusted and bonded member of the family by the family magic. I believe you won't have to worry about that for much longer, he said softly as he wrapped his around her and inhaled her vanilla scent. He felt her surprise before the look of confusion on her face turned into one of comprehension. Harry's lips captured hers in a soft key. A small flash broke them apart. His cousin Jasmine stood before them with a ridiculously large camera. You will enjoy the picture, she gave them a small smile. We will all need good memories of this night, she said, sounding both wise beyond her years and saddened for some reason before she bounced off to take pictures of the others. Harry stared after the little seer, an icy feeling stabbed its way down his back. He didn't have time to wonder what his little cousin meant since Hermione was suddenly pulling him away from the wall and towards the dance floor. The area seemed to clear as they arrived, but neither of them noticed it. Harry's eyes only saw Hermione's. Harry pulled her close and led them in their dance. The world around them faded away. I wonder if she realized that I just declared my intention to marry her, he thought as they slowly danced in a circle to the soft music. After what felt like an eternity of bliss, Harry felt the wards around Potter Manors alerting him of danger. He lifted his head from the back of her Hermione's and looked around. Harry, what's wrong? Harry ignored her for the moment, drawing his wand, and magic gathered around him. He searched for Henriette and Malfoy. They seemed to be enjoying themselves with Uncle Virgil near Harry's table. Jonas. Harry frantically searched for his wayward cousin. Those around them also looked alert, though no one knew what Harry was reacting to. He quickly finally spotted the blonde boy leaning on a table behind Harry with his wand in hand and a deep scowl on his face. Harry saw the dark mark on the B's arm pulsing with a dark light, unseen by those around him. The bastard! Harry's magic flared angrily. Even Hermione took a step back from him. Henry! Uncle Virgil called out, rushing in his direction. The room had gone quiet as everyone looked at Harry worriedly. Harry only had eyes for his cousin. He apparated to directly in front of Jonas and disarmed him wordlessly in a blink of an eye. The blonde was chained to the wall. You dare betray your own family! Harry bellowed. Demeaning yourself by licking the boots of the hybrid master of yours is one thing, this. There was a loud boom, and the room shook slightly. Harry felt the centuries-old wards ripple under an immense attack from inside and out. Children began running frantically to their parents. Someone was crying. What is going on here? Jonas's father said angrily, pushing Harry away from his son and trying to unchain Jonas from the wall. Harry had no time to explain himself as another attack on the wards pushed him down to his knees. Uncle Virgil tried to catch him. The man went from looking like a cheerful grandfather to a battle-worn warrior in the blink of an eye. He threw a surprised look at his grandson's arm. Jonas, what have you done? He murmured sadly. Harry shakily got back to his feet, ignoring the panicking mass of people. Potter Manor elves to me. Before the elves could even pop in, Harry was issuing commands. Evacuate the room, children and their parents first. Take everyone to the Potter safe house. He looked around quickly for FC, and he found the man hurrying toward him. Harry dropped to his knees again, shouting out in pain, I can't hold the wards. They are attacking from two sides. His vision swam as the pain receded briefly. Hermione was casting spells on her dress so she could move more freely. Harry. Look at me. You have to stay focused. I need Henriette. Harry managed to get out through the pain. Wards Henriette has to hold. A look unknown to Harry crossed her face and was gone before he could think about it. Henriette! Hermione shouted. As the next assault began, Harry was happy he was already on the floor. He convulsed heavily. FC cast a cushioning spell on the ground beneath him, for which Harry grateful as the convulsions stopped. Harry felt someone press their hands to his temples and guide his face towards theirs. Blood dripped down his chin as he fought the urge to scream. Transfer them to me, Henry, you have to fight. Henriette's face swam into focus before his eyes. Harry gritted his teeth. He didn't want to trust the girl, but he knew he had to. He wasn't able to bear the weight of the wards and protect the family simultaneously. Henriette was the only person in the room who had had the full weight of the wards before. Protect all, Harry growled out at her. Henriette swallowed nervously and nodded wordlessly. Despite their issues, a bond of mutual understanding still existed between them. Harry took a deep breath and looked into her eyes. He willed the wards to her. Images, ward schemes, runic patterns and much more flashed before his eyes. The transfer of the manor wards was over in an instant. Henriette reeled back as if physically struck, and Harry sagged in relief. Malfoy ran to Henriette's side despite the number of wands that followed his every movement. FC suddenly shoved 2 potions in Harry's face. Harry opened his mouth obediently. He jumped to his feet, wand in hand, with his head pounding and the room swimming before his eyes. The elves had managed to evacuate most of the people in the room. Everyone else had their wands at the ready. It was clear to all what had to be done. Henriette, let them in, Harry said in the direction of his cousin and Malfoy. Henriette nodded, obviously in pain. She knew to lower the apparition wards. Harry gave her an apologetic look, his eyes blazing with a furious rage. Hermione, protect them. He nodded to Henriette and Malfoy, who, as a non-blood relative, had attended the family gathering without a wand. Hermione gave a small nod and began whispering defensive spells to herself. If the situation wasn't so deadly, Harry would have made a joke. A loud, booming crack of magical displacement preceded the appearance of 10 or so Death Eaters and their master in the room. I wonder where he dug up so many followers. I was sure most had died in the explosion. Maybe they had not been present that day. Harry, like everyone else present, immediately unleashed a barrage of deadly spells into their midst. The intruders were outnumbered at least 6 to 1, and the Potters were giving no quarter. Henriette commanded the manor wards. Masterfully animated stone animals swarmed the room and protected the family from deadly spells. After 2 or 3 of the intruders fell, the others dissipated away one by one. Cloaked in a shroud of darkness, Voldemort was showing why he was internationally considered one of the darkest Dark Lords of all time. The man was still suffering under the Potter judgment spell since he had created the Horcrux after the Battle of Azkaban. Harry assumed the man had used his last Horcrux to return to strength. FC had feared that the creation of an 8th would make Snakeface even more unhinged and magically unstable. Harry couldn't help but hope that the monster imploded as FC Australian Unspeakables believed he would. As a stone eagle exploded near his head after intercepting a rather evil-looking curse, Harry knew the battle would have to end soon. Voldemort was holding up admirably under the power of 50 wands, and not even at full strength or with his bonded wand. They also didn't seem to be tiring him out anytime soon. No one needs to get hurt tonight, he told himself resolutely. He gathered his magic, the family magic, and the wild magic that swirled in the area for a final attack. With a mighty growl, Harry released the magic in a torrent of unearthly light beams at the monster. Be gone from our midst, beast of darkness. Voldemort let loose a scream of rage as the beams of light smashed into him. The smell of burning linen and skin filled the room. The rest of the attack blurred by for Harry under the onslaught of banishing magic. Voldemort was cast out of Potter Manor with a loud boom as the wards ejected him. Harry's was suddenly looking into Hermione's concerned brown eyes when her eyes took on an alarmed and frightened look. Harry then found himself looking into Henriette's blue eyes once more and feeling the weight of the wards rest upon his mind and magic once more. That's not right, he thought. He had no time to consider the logical sequence of the memories since the next began. He was suddenly on the ground, his head in someone's lap. Hermione. He knew instinctively that it was Hermione. He could spot Hermione's scent and feel her comforting magic anywhere. There was shouting and someone crying, "Don't cry," he thought when he realized it was Hermione who was crying. A spell of some sort illuminated that area around them with a yellow glow, and a large shadow covered him and Hermione. And then the memories stopped. Harry blinked slowly and found himself lying on his back on a bed of sorts. The scenery had changed, and Harry was suddenly looking up at a sterile, white-colored ceiling. Voices around him spoke softly, but he could not hear them properly. They sounded close, yet still so far away. Henriette did the right thing, he heard someone, FC, he discerned, say in a low voice. Hermione's voice responded from near his bed. I won't argue on that. She sighed deeply. I hope he survives the curse. The Mediwitch said he was ill for a while, FC said coldly. Harry made to sit up. Not ill, he groaned. His voice sounded raw. Hands pushed him back onto the bed. He protested briefly when he felt his magic spike and surround him. He took a moment to refresh his occlumency shields and reined in his magic. He wasn't in danger. Lord Potter. Lord Potter. A new voice said strongly. Harry relaxed back onto the bed. Yes. Good, he knows who he is, someone said. Lord Potter, do you know where you are? Harry took a deep breath, that a typical doctor phrase, most likely in a hospital. As usual, he said with a small cough. Something was suddenly pressed to his lips by shaking hands. At least you managed nearly 3 months without being sent to Madame Pomfrey, Hermione said softly as Harry took a sip of the offered water. Harry opened his eyes once more, blinking away the pain in his eyes from the brightness of the room. Lord Potter, do you remember what happened? He turned to see a nondescript woman in white Mediwitch robes, peering at him over a non-magical clipboard. Harry growled deep in his throat. Jonas, his magic spiked again in the room. The lights darkened and the bed shook slightly before he could control it. The Mediwitch looked to FC, who stood with arms crossed by the door, who nodded affirmatively to her in spoken question. Harry took a deep breath and looked around. Where is everyone? He waved away Hermione's attempt to help him as he slowly brought himself in an upright position. He had spent enough time in the hospital wing at Hogwarts to know better than to make sudden moves with a Mediwitch present. How is everyone? Were there any? Harry, Hermione began softly. Harry's eyes flashed angrily at her. I need facts. What happened? Is everyone safe? Did Snakeface? His voice caught in his raw throat. Henry, everyone survived. FC cut in after Hermione gave Harry an admonishing look. Jonas tried to attack you once you received the wards from Henriette. FC swallowed a lump in his throat. Dad jumped in front of the curse. Harry's heart dropped. But you said everyone survived. Hermione grabbed Harry's hand. Your uncle survived. He's just in bad condition. His brothers and Aunt Gina just left here to go see to him. Harry could feel the inevitable lingering in the air. Hot, angry tears burned his eyes. How long? He managed to squeeze out of his tight throat. How long does he have to live? His arms were suddenly filled with a tear-stained Hermione. The Medi-Wizard said Dad has a week or two. FC voice broke from the weight of emotions, but with his other illness, a few days tops. A sob broke Harry's resolve. It took a moment for him to realize that the sob had come from him and not Hermione. He closed his eyes and tried to process everything. His mind tugged up a memory almost instantly. Jonas, pale and trembling, lay on the floor before Harry after having been cursed by someone and stared Harry directly in the eye. Please forgive me. Seeing the Ministry holding cells from within had never been on Dumbledore's list of things to do before he was called upon for his next great adventure. He never realized that the cells were so dirty and cold. The accumulated filth covering every surface around him was what annoyed the fastidiously spotless wizard the most. Many didn't know it, but Albus Dumbledore had a mild case of mysophobia. It was one reason why his brother kept his bar as dirty and dingy as possible, to ensure that his much-detested brother spent very little time in his presence. The mere thought of his brother's unhygienic cleaning cloth made Dumbledore shudder. The sound of footsteps heading in his direction brought Dumbledore out of his thoughts. He wondered briefly who could be visiting him. For someone so renowned and then so publicly dethroned, Dumbledore had not had a single visitor in the many days he had enjoyed the Ministry's hospitality. He assumed that he was being hidden or forbidden contact. I expected at least Cassiopeia Black to stop by to gloat. As the door opened and the visitor, a nondescript unspeakable, subdued him with a series of stunners, Dumbledore remembered what the day was. It was time for his second interrogation. The stunners limited his cognitive abilities, especially his ability to strengthen his mental shields for the inevitable questioning. Any Occlumen's master worth their title knew the easiest way to pass time was to reinforce their shields and revisit their memories. Dumbledore had taken it a step further during his incarceration and edited memories to such an impeccable quality that could fool even Veritaserum. With the way things are progressing, it is better to be prepared than caught unaware, he had told himself after the last interrogation. As usual, his suspicion was correct. His first and last, surprise interrogation had proven to him that he needed to be more careful and less assured of how he believed and assumed things would take place. After his brief, and rather revealing, questioning before the Wizengamot in November, he had been swiftly shown to a cell. He assumed then that the Wizengamot would simply vote to have him imprisoned in Azkaban until the end of his days. However swift those thrice-damned magic suppressors will make that day come, he had thought then. For a brief moment, he had not cared. Fawkes' desertion and the loss of the Elder Wand had both destroyed him so thoroughly that he had not been in his right mind. He truly had not cared if he had gone to the Dementor-less prison or was sent straight through the death veil. To Dumbledore's great shock, a day after he was declared guilty by the Wizengamot, He was taken by surprise, stunned and removed from his cell only to wake up in an interrogation room. He realized then he was not being condemned and secreted off to his doom. His highly analytic mind had created several scenarios where he would be able to talk his way to freedom and, while editing and discarding the scenarios, the door to the small room had opened with a bang. "I still believe we should just toss his evil," Boney asked through the veil, "and wash our hands of him." Griselda Marchbanks growled as she stormed into the room. He tried to escape by Phoenix. "It's unheard of." Madame Augusta Longbottom, Director Amelia Bones, and Lady Cassiopeia Black followed closely behind. Even with his mind elsewhere, Dumbledore knew that nothing good could come of a meeting of the four most politically and magically powerful witches in the country. "I agree," Cassiopeia Black said in her usual, indifferent tone, "but, I agree with Eris Dagworth Granger. The public and future generations will need closure. We will need to prevent any future arrogating of dictatorial powers by so-called light lords to themselves." Despite how much Dumbledore hated the apathetic hag, he could only tip his hat to her eloquence. He had done just that. "And you don't really believe that his brief disclosure in the courtroom was all he has to share from his century of manipulation, scheming and machinations?" Dumbledore heard his neck crack as he turned to see who the new voice belonged to and mentally berated himself for not noticing the arrival of a few others. "Ms. Granger," Dumbledore blurted out, confused. What purpose could she have here? "Of course, of all the prominent women in the room," Lady Black said with an elegant roll of her eyes. Ms. Granger giggled. "My presence must confuse him the most." The other ladies laughed at some private joke. Dumbledore instantly recognized the woman next to Ms. Granger. Having spent his childhood in Godric's Hollow with Bathilda Bagshot, Bathilda stood comfortably next to the poisonous Queen of Quill, Rita Skeeter, and Lady Esmeralda Jones. Lady Paulina Abbott entered quietly and closed the door behind her. His quick mind caught up with exactly which women were in the room and the meaning of their presence in one room, in an interrogation room. His shocked gasp cut through the side discussions in the room. "Judicia representia," he murmured aloud. "Damn it," Augusta yelled randomly, of all the random laws the goat could remember. She withdrew a few galleons from her pocket and handed them to Amelia and Cassiopeia, who both accepted with a smirk. Dumbledore ignored the blatant gamesmanship that would have normally added insult to his injury in light of the unexpected, unprecedented judicial proceedings. It was basically unheard of, and definitely not public knowledge, that if the representatives of certain of the main parts of the government and public came together, they could call forth a special judicial body to oversee cases of treason or others crime of the highest caliber if necessary. The chief wizard, minister, director of the DMLE, the leaders of each fraction of the Wizengamot, the representative to the ICW, the headmaster of Hogwarts, a governor from the Hogwarts board of directors, with a member of the press and a member of the populace could form a legal junta or even a sub-government. A small smirk graced Dumbledore's face as he did his mental tallying with Chief Witch Marchbanks, Minister Longbottom, Director Bones, Hogwarts Governor Lady Black, leader of the Light Lady Jones, and Rita Skeeter as a member of the press. There were still a few people missing. "Though I commend you on your knowledge of long-forgotten laws, you seem to be missing a few members of your party." The door opened and interrupted him. His dear Minerva entered with Lady Malfoy, a rather particular pairing that neither woman seemed quite comfortable with, and gave a small apology for her tardiness. While Minerva conjured a few seats for the others, Dumbledore quickly recounted mentally. "This meeting in Judicia Representia is now in session." Augusta intoned suddenly. A snap of magic in the air forced all present to sit up straighter in their seats. Dumbledore blanched. This is impossible." A few beads of sweat trickled down his face. He was not prepared for a questioning. He faced the gynocratic wall of stoic and unforgiving faces on the other side of the table with obvious fear. He had foolishly thought his conviction would be swift and his deepest secrets safe. He quickly began to reinforce his mental walls and hide precious secrets in decades-old mental vaults. No such meeting of government had ever occurred in Dumbledore's extensive knowledge of history, and he definitely had not reckoned with such a move. "Eris Granger Dagworth?" Augusta asked, turning to the youngest member of the panel. An ICW-grade dictation quill and a roll of official and, as Dumbledore mentally noted, very expensive ever parchment lay before the girl, at the ready. How in Merlin's beard did she acquire one? They were rarely seen outside of ICW meetings. "Ready, Madame Longbottom," the girl said seriously. She gave Dumbledore a small wink, which only confused him further. She wouldn't go against Harry to help Dumbledore out of prison, of that he was sure. He found himself swimming in confusion. This in judicia representia trial of Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, as ordained by the founding magic of this government, is in session with Minister of Magic Augusta Longbottom, Director of the Executive, presiding I, Augusta Longbottom, swear to uphold the laws of this land with both my actions and words. I, Amelia Susan Bones, Director of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, Director of the Judiciary, swear to uphold the laws of this land with both my actions and words for this trial of Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. I, Griselda Marchbanks, Chief Witch of the Wizengamot, Director of the Legislative, swear to uphold the laws of this land with both my actions and words for this trial of Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. I, Narcissa Malfoy, Governess of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, swear to uphold the laws of this land with both my actions and words for this trial of Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. She glared at Rita Skeeter, who seemed to be all but bouncing excitedly in her seat. I, Minerva McGonagall, Interim Headmistress of Hogwarts Institute of Witchcraft and Wizardry, swear to uphold the laws of this land with both my actions and words for this trial of Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. She was barely able to keep herself from snarling at Dumbledore's loud gulp. A small look was shared between Lady Jones and Lady Abbott, who then turned to Lady Black. Lady Black gave a stiff nod. I, Esmeralda Jones, Lady of the Light, swear to uphold the laws of this land with both my actions and words for this trial of Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. I, Paulina Abbott, Lady of the Grey, swear to uphold the laws of this land with both my actions and words for this trial of Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. Dumbledore sighed. The return of the Grey was inevitable, but it remained against everything he believed in. He had hoped that within the world of his creation divided into light and dark, the Grey would merely disappear after a few generations. He might have had many qualms with dark magicals, but the Grey was the most unpredictable, powerful, and, worst of all, uncontrollable. He had a feeling that Harry would also realign the Potters with the Greys, giving their base a powerful figure and more than enough credence to realign many formerly neutrals. All of my hard work. I, Cassiopeia Black, Lady of the Dark, swear to uphold the laws of this land with both my actions and words for this trial of Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. I, Rita Skeeter, Member of the Press, swear to uphold the laws of this land with both my actions and words for this trial of Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. I, Bathilda Bagshot, a citizen of the land, swear to uphold the laws of this land with both my actions and words for this trial of Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. There was a brief pause. For a moment, Dumbledore believed the women had misread their history and forgotten that they, now, also needed the representative to the ICW. The ICW predated the Ministry of Magic by 15 years, thus any stipulations of the Wizards' Council Charter, and for judicia representia a representative of each main branch of magical society must be present, had to be fulfilled. Dumbledore was, as far as he knew, the only ICW representative in the room, and he most certainly would not be swearing to question himself. He almost sighed in relief at the loophole. One of the most useful escape scenarios he was creating in his head was to use Ms. Granger's love of authority and play Augusta against Lady Black, solely as a distraction, while subtly reminding Paulina of the debt owed by the Abbotts to the Dumbledores from when one of his ancestors saved one of hers from a rampaging dragon. That scenario would take a lot of sweet-talking Minerva and Bathilda, but it would not be impossible. He would have to use the last of his power for some voice magic. Or, I can fake a heart attack and grab the wand of whoever comes too close. He liked that scenario more. I, Hermione Granger, official counsel to the British representative to the International Confederation of Wizards, swear to uphold the laws of this land with both my actions and words for this trial of Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. So mote it be. The women all said together. A burst of magic flowed through the room. Dumbledore's mouth dropped open, and he was promptly petrified by Lady Bones. She swiftly used his surprise to slip 2 vials of potion into his mouth. I told you it would be a glorious expression. Lady Black roared with laughter. Dumbledore barely noticed Rita Skeeter fighting with her giggles to take a picture of his face. He was otherwise preoccupied. Dumbledore felt the grip on his shields lessen dangerously. He hadn't lost control over his shields in over 80 years. This should not be possible with normal Veritaserum. Amelia cleared her throat loudly, due to the legendary Occlumency of the accused, 2 non-lethal doses of pure truth serum, a throat lubricant, undiluted pepper-up potion and a wit-numbing potion have been applied, Amelia stated as the quill scratched in front of Ms. Granger, unknowingly answering Dumbledore's unspoken question. The smirk on Ms. Granger's revealed to Dumbledore that the potion cocktail had been in some way her idea. And then, the panel of intelligent and powerful witches proceeded to squeeze every secret, every manipulation and every memory, painful, insignificant or embarrassing they might have been, out of Dumbledore, beginning with the simple question, what did you do every day of your life as far back as you can remember? The pepper-up potion had such an effect on him that he barely noticed his mouth moving, so quickly did he speak he had no chance to stop the flow of information out of his mouth. The panel of women left minutes into his monologue, at the point where he received his first wand illegally from his uncle Wulfric at age 8 when the women returned. Approximately 10 hours later, Dumbledore was recounting his tenure as Transfiguration Professor at Hogwarts after checking the parchment and quill. They left once more. Dumbledore could feel the wit-numbing potion wearing off as he spoke about convincing and confounding his predecessor, Armando Dippet, into going into retirement earlier. As rumors of Tom's return to Britain made it to him, he focused on trying to change or stem the words flying out of his mouth. They could not be allowed to know the secrets of his power, the rituals, the depth of his interaction with the dark arts in his youth, or the sum of the things he had done to the families of many of the women on the panel. Yet, try as he might, the pure truth serums held it was a clever mixture of potions, and Dumbledore wondered briefly if it were of Severus brew. The potions targeted the organizational aspect of occlumency. He had not been directly asked to reveal anything specific. He regurgitated one memory after another in no logical order other than the day on which the memories were made. If he had been asked to talk about one single event, he would have been able to toy around with the wording by focusing on what happened and changing small aspects in his mindscape. His mind was too organized to prevent the attack, and he couldn't focus on all of his memories at once. A bundle of memories all relating to the same theme, subject or secret, maybe, but a day usually had many unconnected events. Luckily, he successfully kept his mental vault locked with some of the darkest rituals and his own experimentations with immortality safe within. At least there would be some secrets that ended with him. He finally managed to stop speaking when the question had run its course. His head sagged under dehydration and hunger. A small stinging hex abruptly woke him. He hadn't even noticed falling asleep. Lady Black stood above him with a wicked grin on her face, one which he would have just loved to spell onto her backside. You smell unearthly, Albus, the gray-haired harpy said, cleaning him and his clothes with a rough scourgify. His jaw ached from speaking incessantly for hours on end. She dipped a small healing potion into his mouth. Of course, the oaths they swore prevent them from any inhumane acts toward him or in torture that could be considered in contempt of the law. Dumbledore was suddenly grateful for the junta. He might just make it through and out of this. Water and a soup of some sorts appeared before him, most likely mixed with nutrient potions, while Ms. Granger looked through the rolls of ever parchment with amazement. His hands were uncuffed from each other, but the magic inhibitors remained firmly on his wrist. He dug into his meal with gusto. The water tasted like heaven. 91 feet of parchment, she exclaimed as she removed the dictation quill. Without the full panel present, no questions could be asked. Astounding. She skimmed the first few before her eyes narrowed, and her brow furrowed. Is something the matter, Heiress Granger Dagworth? Ms. Granger seemed to flinch slightly at the title. I think you should call the others. I believe I know now how we can speed up this trial. Earlier, Dumbledore would have paid to see Lady Black take an order. Indirect it might have been. From a muggle born with light tendencies and of Ms. Granger's age, he looked forward to the inevitable explosion. However, Lady Black merely left swiftly while Ms. Granger continued to read the rolls of parchment at a speed that would please any educator. Dumbledore watched conflicted as the girl made a copy of the transcripts to make remarks on. If Dumbledore weren't so hungry, thirsty and tired, he would have spoken to the clever girl to get her to share her thoughts with him so that he could prepare for the next round of interrogation. As he finished his soup and bread, the other ladies returned. Without warning, he was petrified once more and force-fed potions. The questioning recommenced abruptly. What were all actions or activities you supported, agreed with or carried out that were immoral, harmful or against the laws of our country before the time they were enacted? Dumbledore was taken aback by the question. He realized that he must have left some sort of holes or evidence of his misdirection in his answers to the first question. He wondered briefly what it was that tipped off the clever girl. He spent some time answering at a more sedate pace. What secrets, moments, ideas or events you never told another soul? He was asked after answering the first question. He fought the question with all he had, but it was no use. He realized that there was nothing he could to hinder it. He was too weak and had no strength to take care of his shields. The 11 women became much more attentive, and disgusted, the more his mouth moved. He wanted to cry and shut his eyes to keep from seeing their reactions. When he finished, he opened his eyes to see to multiple looks of horror and disgust. Bathilda shook her old head in shame, and Miss Skeeter looked as though Christmas had come early. Miss Granger looked as if Dumbledore admitted to committing genocide on thousands of Muggle children and their pets. Though, if one counts the Second Battle of the Great War, Dumbledore had done what he could to repress that particularly dark memory. Is there anything that you purposefully or unintentionally left out of your answers during this trial? The Muggle-born witch growled out. After another 10 minutes of answering, he visibly relaxed. He realized his mistake after Miss Granger slid Amelia a small note. Madame Bones narrowed her eyes. Is there anything that you haven't told us in detail already that you have not told a soul, would not tell a soul or didn't want to tell us? They had him. When he was done responding, Dumbledore felt like a wrung-out prune. The ladies barely cast a look in his direction as they ended the trial, gathered the material and left the room. Merlin, when this gets out, Paulina Abbott murmured, there will be a revolt in the streets. This is why we must control the release, Madame Bones said as she closed the door. Dumbledore had been left, used and exhausted to his thoughts. He had been dragged to his cell by an unspeakable and dumped there unceremoniously. That was exactly 1 month ago. Dumbledore was of no other use to the women at the moment. There was nothing he had to hide anymore, and, if he were truly honest with himself, he had never felt so free in his life. Most of his life recently had been filled with scheming and manipulating to keep previous actions from being revealed and to keep contingency plans from being disturbed. So it was with a polite, peaceful smile that Dumbledore greeted the silent group of women as they entered the interrogation room. Once they set up their recording quill and retook their vows for the Judicia Representia, Amelia admitted the potions to a willing Dumbledore. He missed the meaningful look that passed between Miss Granger and Griselda. Amelia began as she had before. Due to the legendary occlumency of the accused, 2 non-lethal doses of pure truth serum, a throat lubricant, undiluted pepper-up potion and a wit-numbing potion have been applied. Miss Granger asked one question before the women all departed silently. For each moment you can remember of your life, in chronological order, how did you feel and what did you think at that moment or of that moment? In the back of his mind, as his mouth moved on its own accord, Dumbledore wondered briefly what the purpose of this question could be. The looks on the faces of most of the women seemed conflicted. He considered the likelihood of them just wanting to know his thinking and decision-making before pushing him through the veil. Clearing their own consciences most likely, he assumed with a mental sigh. Just as before, the women returned to check the quill after a few hours to their, and his, utter surprise, he was just about finished with his answers. Maybe not fighting the Veritaserum did indeed expedite the answering. He remembered reading something similar in a research paper from a former student of Washington Irving Bishop, a world-renowned mental mage from the States, who faked his Muggle death at the end of the 19th century when the U.S. Magical Court declared he was pushing the boundaries of the International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy. The women in the room all turned to Miss Granger, who cleared her throat loudly. Please administer the antidotes. It was Amelia again who poured the potions down his throat. He wondered briefly if there was a particular reason that Amelia seemed solely responsible for giving him potions. This session of Judicia Representia concludes with the following sentence for the convicted. Miss Granger began slowly. The other women seemed either annoyed or angry. We find Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore guilty of the following crimes. Dumbledore tuned the rest of Miss Granger's speech out. He knew whatever he would be convicted on would mean a long time in Azkaban. He wondered if they would be giving him magic suppression cuffs at his age or magic inhibitors. He was pretty sure he would not live to see his next birthday with the former, since they blocked the flow of magic through the body and the latter merely prevented the use of magic. The magic inhibitors were so harmless that children with rather volatile magic were usually made wear them. Magic suppressors were usually only used on criminals and captives. Do you swear the oath, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore? Dumbledore shook his head. Pardon, my mind was elsewhere, Miss Granger. Cassiopeia growled from her spot beside Madame Longbottom. Her title is Heiress Granger Dagworth. Dumbledore ducked his head in shame. Forgive me, Heiress Granger Dagworth, could you repeat the oath and its purpose? Ms. Granger, and she would remain so in his mind, sighed. In order for you to be able to expedite your sentence to a week in isolation and become a professor of alchemy and history in the departments of transfiguration and history at Hogwarts Institute of Witchcraft and Wizardry, you are required to swear the oath before you. On your magic. Dumbledore saw the oath on the parchment before him and did not hesitate to swear the oath. His mind whirled around the prospect of him returning to his dear Hogwarts. I, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, hereby swear on my magic to fulfill the following 4 oaths. I swear to serve the rest of my days as Associate Professor of Alchemy and History at Hogwarts Institute of Witchcraft and Wizardry beginning January 15, 1996. I swear to teach my subjects without bias and without favoring any student to the best of my abilities. Dumbledore could feel the magic gathering around him as he reached the second half of the oath. Very clever. So wisely partitioned that I would feel relaxed enough not to stop until the magic settled after the second oath. Now, if I stopped reading, I would lose my magic for not completing the 4-part oath. I swear to observe the rules of supervision as declared by this session of Judicia Representia. I will have no unsupervised interactions with students, nor will I interfere with their personal lives. I will only take off my magic inhibitors for practical applications of magic in classes and to defend myself or others. I will not leave the confines of Hogwarts without the unassisted and express permission of a majority of the panel members of this session of Judicia Representia. Dumbledore rubbed his watering eyes with a shaky hand. Even he wasn't sure if they were tears of joy for getting a second chance or tears of fury for being penalized so severely and thoroughly. I swear to relinquish all of my earthly possessions to Hogwarts. I swear to never run for or influence anyone running for a political office in magical Britain or elsewhere. I swear to be open and truthful in all interactions I have with others. So mote it be. So mote it be. It was only after the session closed, and he was being moved to his holding cell, that it occurred to him that the word, Institute, had been added to Hogwarts. Name what in Merlin's name had been going on in my absence? Surely Hogwarts hadn't changed so much. The day prior, sunlight danced across every surface it could in the newly built Potions Mastery Lab at the recently rechristened Hogwarts Institute of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Since extreme exposure to sunlight rendered some potions' ingredients, and even potions, toxic or unusable, the windows were all spelled to reflect the rays while illuminating the room. Walls of pure and transparent, magical glass separated 10 subunits of the lab. Severus Snape sat in the largest of the units. It was his main lab office and gave him a clear view into each of the other labs. He was considering moving his own personal lab from the dungeons in the room. The new lab had the best equipment, stockroom, and facilities he had ever seen, let alone been in. He found himself overwhelmed with emotion as he gazed out upon his realm. He had not expected Lord Potter, Harry, he abruptly reminded himself, to carry through with his plan to make Hogwarts the best learning institution in the world so quickly and thoroughly. Harry had sat down with all professors and Madame Marchbanks the day after Albus' trial. After revisiting each contract personally and having them each swear an oath to uphold their contracts, the faculty meeting had the sole focus of discussing what each class needed, informing them of the research conducted in their field, into the school, and into what practices and methods were being used by other professors and schools. Needless to say, the entire room had been rendered speechless as he presented his finding in a persuasive yet none too criticizing manner. Hogwarts was a backward-thinking school for children and was struggling to hold onto its position as one of the premier schools of magic. Harry informed them that Hogwarts would be undergoing a drastic change in teaching, facilities and target group. He laid out his plan to a shell-shocked group of professors. No professor was to hold more than 2 positions, be it teaching more than 2 different subjects, or teaching while having headship of a house or leading one of the new departments. Minerva had all but bounced in her seat at that announcement. As deputy headmistress, head of Gryffindor and Transfiguration professor, she had experienced how thin-spread one could be with multiple positions. Harry called such multitasking an affront and hindrance to both professors and students, while making it clear that the fault was not completely Minerva's but laid largely on Dumbledore and his manipulations. Additionally, no professor would be teaching more than 20 students per lecture class, something that all of them scoffed at as being logistically unrealistic. Harry had produced critical empirical evidence from non-magical, private universities across the globe that proved the benefits of teaching fewer students and having fewer responsibilities. Students shouldn't be shepherded through their learning but guided individually to greatness, he had stated then with power. Then Harry informed them of his mission, to transform Hogwarts from a mere school for children into the most renowned institution of learning for all. The first classes instructed by the founders of Hogwarts had not included just children but also adults who wanted to refine or complement their existing knowledge. Even professors should be encouraged to sit in on guest lectures or interesting lessons from their colleagues for their own professional development. He informed the professors afterward that departments would be headed by masters of the fields and would include apprentices, who would also function as associate professors and take on the bulk of the classwork. It was also a practice Harry had learned off of many non-magical universities. Professors gave lectures, and their teaching assistants dealt with the day-to-day work, allowing the professors to focus on researching their own topics, training aspiring master students and instructing the few, precocious and budding future masters among the masses. Harry gave each current professor, Trelawney, Hagrid, Burbage, Binns and Weasley excluded since new master-level instructors would be found for those subjects, and Weasley's employment was ended rather abruptly. The choice to be the first head of departments at Hogwarts for their areas. The initial bulk of the work for the heads of departments would be to work with Harry to build up their facilities, their faculty and their objectives for the upcoming school year. He explained, after the beginning of the next term, he expected the heads of departments to produce more interest in their department and the institute by holding a minimum of 2 conferences, bringing in famous and appropriate guest lecturers, balancing the budgets that each department would receive and optimizing the education of those in their department through goal orientation. It was the professional freedom that most of them were not used to but had always longed for. Rolanda immediately proposed a true Quidditch training program with proper brooms and feeding options for professional Quidditch teams. The English under-17 Quidditch team had been trying to get an official cooperation with Hogwarts for years, but Albus did not want to put too much pressure on the children. Pomona began muttering about sponsored trips to foreign plant reserves, and Phileas immediately wanted to revive the Hogwarts dueling circuit, both of which had been struck from the agenda in the last century for financial reasons by the former board of directors. After a brief overview of the baseline wages for heads of departments, heads of houses, professors, associate professors, apprentices and guest lecturers, Severus and all of his colleagues were quick to agree to the challenge. Heads of departments would receive double the pay of a regular professor due to their numerous responsibilities. Harry had sat with each of them individually after the subsequent luncheon to sign a new head of department contract, and most of them saw the beginning of a bright era at Hogwarts almost immediately. That had been nearly a month ago. Since then, Hogwarts bustled with activity. Warders, stonemasons, architects, artists, inventors and each of his colleagues all hurried to have the school prepared for the unveiling a week before the next term was set to begin. Due to Snape's tenacity and his clear vision of what he wanted, the Potions Master's facilities had been the first to be completed. Snape looked upon his realm with pride. Every now and then one of his colleagues or a random visitor would drop by to see the state-of-the-art facility. Master Snape. Snape jolted in his mind. He hadn't realized he had spaced out, staring at the beautiful room and thinking about what grand things he would be able to accomplish there. He turned to the dark-skinned American apprentice standing at the entrance to his personal lab. "Apprentice Thompson, how is your potion coming along?" The 24-year-old simply gave a loopy grin. Snape couldn't keep from rolling his eyes. Of all of his 3, soon to be 5, potions apprentices, Jamal Thompson was the most anathema to the stuffy, traditional British wizarding society. The young man had been born in New Mexico and studied in Massachusetts under the B.Udal potion master Timothy Shaw, who Snape knew personally from international potions conferences. Shaw had written a rather brief recommendation letter for Thompson, lamenting the fact that the young man had decided to leave his labs for a ridiculous quest to unearth mythical potions. In the same line, Shaw argued that Snape would be nothing but a blind baboon to not accept the exceptional young man. He neglected to state that the boy was absolutely off his cauldron. "Would you like a cup of coffee or some of that nasty tea you Brits seem to like?" Thompson asked with an untypical serious look on his face. "No, thank you," Snape said briskly, ignoring the blatant cultural insult and gathering the applications for 10 further apprentice candidates to be assessed later on. Although there was no limit to the number of apprentices a potion master could take on, most rarely took on more than one. It was a remnant of the old guild system, and Snape could not disagree more with the out-of-date method. Having multiple talented apprentices, or master scholars, would allow for more contemporary research, a more cohesive community and a higher completion rate of exceptional potions. He figured, however, that he personally would not be able to oversee more than 5 apprentices a year due to the lectures he would hold, the 2 conferences he planned to host at Hogwarts, and the need to be available for any assistance the apprentices might require. He and his head of department colleagues would also be teaching the Newt classes in their fields, since that was where many of the most talented students ended up. The class would only be around 10 students, but Snape knew that the number would increase with more students coming to Hogwarts and with his apprentices taking over the teaching of the lower years. "Well, that's a shame," Thompson said with a sigh. Snape noted that the man never gave a report on his potion. Each apprentice was to brew a new, experimental potion of Snape's choosing, potions that would leave most masters scratching their heads in confusion. None of the apprentices had approached him with noteworthy progress. "I wanted to see you spit it out after I told you that my potion is finished." Snape's mouth dropped. Thompson laughed like a maniac as he steered the dumbfounded potions master to his lab. Once more, Snape had to marvel the comfortable and sterile labs his apprentices were breaking in. Each one had spatial expansion charms in place to make their interiors as large as Snape's old personal lab in the dungeons. 4 long counters of white marble took up the most space in the rooms, since most journeyman-level potioneers were expected to brew up to 3 potions at once, yet rarely had the space for such. Snape knew the rooms would be the talk of the upcoming spring conference. There were ventilation spells, sterilization runes on the faucets that provided water, magic dampening controls for the more volatile potions, and each counter had a containment bubble to keep the fumes of one cauldron from interacting with any others. Even the glass panes of the walls held identification, containment, stabilization and ventilation runes, wards and spells aplenty. On both sides of the glass panes is an ultimate safety feature. Snape had been included in the testing of the glass. It was a Japanese creation for an American company that specialized in producing glass for viewing rooms in dueling competitions. The company had been excited to work with Hogwarts and Snape on this new type of glass for potion labs. Hogwarts and Snape would be given a percentage of the revenue after the patent was accepted, which made Harry very happy. Snape doubted that anything short of a dynamite explosion would break the glass. To have apprentices working in such a lab was unheard of. It was state-of-the-art at its best. Potion masters around the world would give their appendages for a chance to brew there. "I should consider renting out labs for a fee. The more profit the potions department generates on its own, the fewer budget meetings I will have to sit through in the future." "Here it is, m'lord," Thompson said, bowing exuberantly and butchering the British accent, as they entered the containment bubble around one his counters. Snape tied his hair with a swift, well-practiced wave of his wand and peered into the silver cauldron. Yellow and green swirls of liquid churned slowly, never truly mixing but definitely in harmonious interaction with one another. "The color is maybe a tick too neon considering the moonwood oil, but this is definitely master quality." Under the circumstances, Snape knew he would not have been able to do much better. The potion was a split potion, technically 2 potions in one. The procedure was the most difficult to manage, and Snape himself had only succeeded twice in his whole career. Magic was used to create a thin barrier between the 2 potions in the same cauldron. Most split potions required that the 2 halves interact briefly at certain moments in the brewing. If the 2 interacted for too much or too little time, or if one potion was not at the correct stage during the phase of interaction, the entire potion was usually ruined instantly. The potions necessitated constant brewing, perfect timing of each potion and the whole, and the finesse of a high master, a potions master who employed and instructed other masters for research purposes. "You do know what this means?" Snape murmured as he summoned an elf to provide them with a quill and some parchment. "That I get to sleep for a week," Thompson said, barely keeping the hope out of his voice. Snape took a quick look at the man's face and tired appearance. "No," Snape deadpanned slowly, dipping the empty quill into the potion. "If this works, you will have to write up your findings and observations and begin preparing a research paper on how you recreated and completed High Master Salazar Slytherin's final work in 2 weeks' time." If he weren't so busy pricking his finger to place a drop of blood on the parchment, Snape would have noticed the man's mouth dangling comically. Snape placed the saturated quill onto the drop of blood on the parchment and nearly fainted from shock as the quill began to move. "Saw Salazar Slytherin," Thompson stuttered as he stumbled to his work desk in a cozy corner of the room and gathered his notes. "Potion translated from Parseltongue by Lord Henry James Potter," he read aloud. "Holy F. K. Snape snorted at the beep! Thompson, despite his uncouth mouth and manners, was definitely growing on him. He could tell that the man loved potions he brewed with such a passion that Snape was left breathless sometimes by his talented results. As the quill stopped writing, its glow disappeared and it dropped lifelessly to the counter. Snape held up the parchment with a shaking hand. The top of the read his name, Severus Tobias Snape, Lord Apparent of House Prince, and what followed was a complete genealogy of his family going back 5 generations. Slytherin, according to the few notes Harry had had the time to translate for him, had not trusted the goblins to perform such an important ritual for wizards. He did not trust the goblins not to sell the information to rivaling wizard clans so that they could end each other and leave their fortunes inevitably in goblin possession. Apparently, his suspicions were justified since the Goblin Rebellion 237 years after his death had revolved around the same issue. The goblins' response had been only to make the service unbelievably expensive and thus available to only a few. That was their procedure to the current day, leaving modest wizards like Snape unable to see their genealogy without paying an arm and a leg. 1 page of genealogy costs the same as my yearly wage, my old wage. And yet, he stood there with 3 pages all because of one brilliant potioneer. Please inform the others that you have completed your potion. You may celebrate responsibly. I hear Rosmerta has taken a liking to you, and I do not wish to deprive her of your presence. I will set up a meeting with Lord Potter so you can present it to him. In the meantime, you should research goblin wizarding law and history regarding genealogy. We don't want to cause the next Goblin Rebellion," Snape said as he darted out of the lab, parchment clutched in his hand. He failed to notice the young man fainting behind him. He was thankful that Harry insisted that all Masters' facilities be on the first floor, close to the remodeled hospital wing, since that meant a shortened trip to his destination, the new library wing. Even without Poppy's maternal presence, the hospital wing was positioning itself as a feeder for St. Mungo's and internationally acclaimed healer programs with its healer curriculum and under its new leadership, head healer Andromeda Tonks. Harry's logic was sound. Most of Snape's apprentices would be working on dangerous potions, especially those who would be recreating potions from the treasure trove of scrolls and notes Harry and Snape had discovered during their trip to render the basilisk in the Chamber of Secrets. When Harry had pushed the scrolls in Greek, Coptic, Gaulish and Latin into Snape's arms and said, "Have fun. You are the scholar, not me," it had taken all of Snape's control not to cry. Harry took it upon himself to translate the Parseltongue as his schedule permitted. Pomona, who had fainted at the sight of the extraordinarily well-preserved specimen of extinct crying pansies, woolly-stalked begonias, legum trees and even a St. Helena olive tree among others in a sealed lab in the chamber, had called on her apprentices and her assistant, Neville Longbottom, to research the plants and cultivate them, with 7 new greenhouses being built to house the plants of 4 of the 5 climate categories, and 3 for priceless plants like the ones from the chamber. Pomona had much on her hands. Snape was sure the woman had never been happier. As he passed by the Great Hall, Snape could only shake his head in disbelief. To say that the room had been renovated would be a serious understatement. The room had been expanded. Harry had estimated that the number of people being housed at Hogwarts would double, if not triple, over the next years, with apprentices, new instructors, and all individuals with magic, including mixed-breed children and adults who had been previously denied by Albus, the Ministry, or fearful parents. The dining halls were a sight to behold. Instead of remodeling or changing the beautiful, original architecture, Harry merely instructed the builders to replicate the Great Hall. The walls in between the 3 halls were replaced with grand columns. The heads of departments would eat on a balcony-like platform that led out onto the 2nd floor of Hogwarts, where the heads of departments also had their offices. With more students and residents, more tables had been added. Phileas mentioned working on a sound-dampening field around all of the tables. The thought of having to hear over 1,000 gibbering students 3 times a day had made him nauseous. He was happy that Phileas found the time to create the field between his travels to all corners of the world to meet with potential apprentices, professors and guest speakers for his department's enchanting and dueling classes. Phileas was also recruiting as deputy headmaster for the Transfiguration department's animagic and animation classes, and for esoteric magics like warding, spellcrafting, geomagic, elemental magic and magics native to other cultures and creatures. If the whispered gossiping of Minerva and Ms. Granger was to be believed, Albus would be returning to teach the very position that made him a legend in both potions and transfiguration subjects. Snape wondered briefly why and how Miss Granger had managed that feat. The usually garrulous girl was rather tight-lipped about Dumbledore. Minerva was too busy overseeing the vast budget for the school, the changes being made to the school, and the hiring process to care about Albus as headmistress. She was luckily only required to sit on the panel for professor candidates who already passed 2 phases of interviews, one interview with the head and an apprentice of their respective department and one interview with the head and a knowledgeable apprentice of a separate department. It was Minerva herself who came up with the rather clever system. "Hello, Severus." Remus Lupin, head of the defensive and offensive magic department, renamed at Harry's behest, greeted him from the entrance of the library. Of course Black and the eldest Weasleyer in tow. Snape had yet to see one of the men without the others close by. "Amazing, isn't it?" Black said, gestured like a child in a sugar quill shop to the library and the castle in general. "Harry is really outdoing himself with the changes here. Luckily, he's not doing it alone. Merlin forbid he would have to organize it all himself." Lupin shuffled a stack of papers in his hand which Snape recognized as the official request forms Harry had provided to each department head for equipping their departments. "Ah, that reminds me, I have to turn in the request forms for a golden cauldron if apprentice. Thompson is as good as I expect him to be, we will need it for his next assignment." Lupin suddenly gave Snape a small conspiratorial grin and threw the elder Weasley a brief look of what Snape suspected to be warning. "Bill, why don't you help me go over the defense learning plans?" But the redhead seemed more confused by the idea than Black, but Snape saw right through the subterfuge in leaving him alone with Black. Before the redhead could say another word, Remus was pulling the man down the hall and was already engaging him in a one-sided conversation. "Manipulative wolf," Black seemed to murmur to himself. "Indeed," Snape said, causing Black to jump slightly. "Could he have already forgotten that I am also here?" He wouldn't put it past the former Azkaban resident to lose his spatial awareness. Merlin only knows what the place did to his already stunted mental growth. Black ran a hand in exasperation through his hair. The confidence with which Black had done the same gesture to ensnare the hearts of many girls and boys during their school days was gone and replaced with an uncomfortable uncertainty. "Look, Sna Severus," Black began in a nervous tone, "I wanted to apologize for, well, everything. I was definitely a pissant to you in our youth, and I was horrible." Black took a deep breath and held up a hand to halt Snape's inevitable, biting response to the nearly 2 decades too late apology. "My great-aunt Cassiopeia forced me to do a rigorous mind-healing regime at St. Mungo's before I can take over the Black Lordship. I didn't want to see how despicable I was, especially to you, but they forced me." He gave a bitter laugh. "They forced me to realize how idiotic we were with our schoolboy rivalry." "Which you started and perpetuated," Snape snarled. Black flinched painfully. "I know," he said quietly. Snape bit his tongue. For the first time in many years there was an uncomfortable pause that neither seemed interested in filling. "Have you seen the new potion facilities?" Snape asked suddenly yet smoothly. Black shook his head in confusion. "Aren't they still in the dungeons?" Without warning, Snape launched into a thorough description of everything that he could think of about the new labs. He turned swiftly to head back in the direction from whence he came. Black stumbled to catch up with him. "Wait, so does this mean you accept my apology?" Black asked as they walked past the great halls. Without breaking stride, Snape said, "Don't make me neuter you, Black," and promptly ignored the insane giggles from the man beside him. The weather seemed to be in mourning just like the Potters. Virgil Orville Potter passed away in the company of his brothers and sisters, 2 of whom flowed in just to see him before his time came. He uttered his last words, "I'm coming, Sarah," just as the clock struck midnight on December 26, 1995, almost a decade after his wife, Sarah Potter née Elizabeth de Coronel, had passed away. And since then, it rained. Harry felt nothing but guilt, and no kind words or sympathetic hugs lessened the fact that Uncle Virgil had taken a curse meant for Harry. The range of emotions was written on his face and in every interaction he had after being released from St. Mungo's the day his Uncle Virgil passed away. In an unexpected show of camaraderie, Hermione and Henriette teamed up to handle the funeral ritual preparations and the funeral pyre. It was clear to all that neither wanted anything to do with the other. They avoided each other like the plague, but they made a formidable team. I wonder how Hermione will react when she learns that Henriette was responsible for the attack on Hogwarts in November. Even now, they stood as far away from each other as physically allowed near Uncle Virgil's pyre, cloaked in pure white ritual robes. According to the obviously shaken Uncle Orville, it was his father's wish to be buried with his dear Sarah in the cemetery near Potter House in Melbourne. The fact that it was his son, currently locked in the manor dungeons, who brought the tragedy upon the family, Orville never acknowledged when FC produced a memory of his father where Uncle Virgil stated that he wished for both he and Sarah to have a ritual pyre and to be placed in the Potter mausoleum. Orville seemed to bitterly disappear into the shadows. Harry could not understand what his cousin had wanted to accomplish with the lie. Orville currently stood on the outskirts of the large group of mourners. Harry shook the peppering rain and running tears from his eyes. He tried to focus on the ritual taking place. He would be forever grateful to Hermione and Henriette for taking on the role of priestesses for the ritual of eternal life. He was barely able to keep himself from bolting from the cemetery when Hermione told him yesterday that she had also had his parents' remains moved from the cemetery in Godric's Hollow. He had turned into a bawling mess. The two beautiful women stood strong beside the chanting high priest, a local druid, dressed in vibrant, purified robes for the old ritual. Harry was basically leaning on FC in order to remain standing near the altar. He only just barely managed to tear his eyes away from Uncle Virgil's serene face at the beginning of the ritual. It just hurt. His mind wandered from the droning of the druid in charge of the ceremony. He had thrown himself into his work, family matters and finances. The days following the attack, Jonas's manipulation of the wards, though minuscule, forced him to take the protection of his family more earnestly. He spent 3 time turns on looking through the Potter and Black grimoires for additional wards to have FC applied to the Potter properties. He would have to practice and do the Black spells himself since FC was not connected to the Blacks. Harry respected the restriction of family spells to members of that family, despite Hermione's protests. A burst of fire yanked him out of his thoughts. Harry noticed the druid holding his wand and directing the fire. The pyre burned a brilliant white before a small explosion of magic rocked them all. One by one they all lit their wands in farewell to a great man whose time had come too soon. So Harry's tears ran cold as the magic of the ritual settled around him. His Uncle Virgil should not have had to jump in front of a curse meant for him. The Death Eaters and their master had to go. Immediately. Uncle's sacrifice, my parents' sacrifice, will not be in vain. Harry approached the glowing urn on the altar and gave a deep bow before sweeping from the funeral with his magic crackling around him like a penumbra of rechanneled rage and determination. As he swept from the cemetery, he caught the eye of several family members whose magic matched the temperate of his own. He nodded to FC, Milton and few others. The Potters were going to end this war, soon. It had been a tiring day for Ronald Weasley. He had had 2 separate book signings for his newest publication and more press conferences than one person should have to ever suffer through. It's times like these that I do not envy Potter, he thought with a mental grimace. After defeating He Who Must Not Be Named nearly a decade ago, Potter's fame had soared so high that he, according to the one interview he gave to Penelope Clearwater in the aftermath of the last battle, had secluded himself in his abnormally large manor with his family. He left only for meetings with other celebrities, politicians, and leaders of various fields. The Prophet had nearly changed the name of their newspaper to Potter Watch, if the rumors in Diagon Alley's corporate section were to be believed. Regardless of the possible name change, the reporters had written about anything they could dig up on the elusive Potters. The public ate up everything it read hungrily. Even his own mother, whose hatred of Sirius Black and Harry Potter was legendary after the tiara debacle that notorious day at Grimmauld Place, swore that Potter was off in Africa fighting evil desert sorcerers for the betterment of the world. Ron had been graced by his former best friend's presence only once, at an invite-only gala for the rich and most powerful in the country 2 years ago at one of the Potter houses. Potter Manor itself had become a thing of modern legends since Potter restricted access to the property for all but loved ones and his closest friends, of which Ron was no longer either. Ron was sure the only reason for his invitation to the small gala was the groundbreaking potions research he had pioneered in triple split brewing. Potter barely deigned to congratulate him or shake the hand of his former best mate. Not like I wanted to touch the slimy bastard anyway. With a hopeful look at his diamond-studded watch, Ron bit back a groan. He was going to be late to his own Order of Merlin ceremony if he didn't hurry home to change and eat. His lifestyle might have evolved over the course of the years, but Ron still never missed a meal. With long steps, he reached the nearest apparition point in little to no time. One well-practiced twirl later, and he found himself standing in front of the house on his elegant and sprawling estate. The whitewashed woods of the main house with their Tudor feel were surrounded by 50 acres, including a croquet lawn with a summer house, an apple orchard, a small lake and a folly. A small wave of satisfaction rolled through him as he subconsciously compared his new home to the burrow and to the residences of his siblings. Although he would never want to replace his childhood home, he was quite proud of having worked hard enough to earn the two-floor manor and surrounding lands. He knew he was the envy of all of his siblings, even though their career successes had quite often preceded and overshadowed his own since he had no chance of receiving the Pruitt headship due to his gender. He had approached his father about petitioning for the Weasley lordship. The last Lord Weasley had been his father's grandfather, and Ron had been certain that the lordship, if the petition were even accepted by the Wizengamot, would go to Bill or Charlie. Therefore, he had been pleasantly surprised when the wise patriarch of their family agreed with him. If anyone has a chance to reinstate the family in the Wizengamot, Ronald, it will be you. His father had even taken care of the paperwork. Ron truly looked forward to raising a family in the new Weasley manor. Unfortunately, no woman managed to stay with him for more than a few weeks. They all usually parted ways due to personality differences, his mother's interference, or because he still compared every woman in his life to the only woman he had ever wanted. He immediately shook the thought of Hermione Potter née Granger viciously out of his head. There was no chance in hell of that happening, and it made little sense to even dwell on it. Master Weasley. The squeaky voices of his house elves enthusiastically greeted him, as they did every time they opened his heavy mahogany doors for him. 2 of his 5 house elves had removed his traveling cloak before he had even noticed. His nose caught the delicious smell of steak and ale pie, and his stomach forced him to follow it. His goblin wards, expensive but a Merlin send beyond belief, suddenly alerted him to someone not looking to harm him or already keyed into the wards apparating onto his property. He sighed. Food would have to wait. No, I'm hungry. They can wait. It's probably a pesky reporter anyway. His stomach growled in agreement, and Ron continued his trek to his extravagant dining hall. He would deal with his guest afterward. Ron, a soft, melodious voice called out from his entrance hall just as he reached the door to his kitchen. Not even considering how his guest got past his wards, his heart began pounding none too gently in his. He knew that voice very well. He turned to see his beautiful, bushy-haired friend of many years standing awkwardly at his door. The years had treated Hermione well. Most witches aged gracefully. Hermione had somehow gotten even more beautiful. Potter does not deserve such a beauty as his wife. Every Merlin-crafted curve of her perfect figure was accentuated by pale blue robes. The food was quickly forgotten as his eyes drank in the sight of the angel in his house. Hermione, what are you doing here? His words came out with barely concealed lust. He noticed then the tracks of tears on her face. I need you, she whispered, her eyes filled with a want that Ron had always longed to see directed at him. His brain barely stopped him from sweeping her off her feet and into his bed. But Potter, he stuttered as she slowly made her way to him. Her magic and perfume overwhelmed him so completely before he could process her response. She was upon him. I left him. You were always the one I wanted, she whispered. You were 10 times the man he could ever be. Her hands were suddenly on his face, under his shirt and in his pants. Yes, she all but purred, definitely 10 times the man. Ron didn't notice his control disappear. Please take me, she murmured. And he did. Clothes were discarded with abandon. Ron heard his shirt rip as Hermione tore it off his muscular. She fisted him through his jeans. Ron wasn't sure how they got to his bed, but he managed to rip off her dress and knickers in one sweep while unbuttoning his pants and gutting her simultaneously. He entered her with one thrust and Mo.Ned out loud as she groaned and whimpered in pleasure beneath him. She Mo.Ned only one word as he found his rhythm of thrusting and pulling out of her, big. Ron felt as if he were in his wildest dream. Yes, he said simply. Whether that was in response to her or just a general contentedness from the situation, he did not know. Their horizontal dance left sweat dripping off both of their bodies. His thrusting was wild, and the mewling noises from her mouth drove him to move deeper and faster into her. Ron felt a pressure building in his loins. He knew it would not be much longer before he released into her. Hermione's orgasm came as a surprise to him. Her velvet walls clenched around him to an unbelievable degree. Hermione. He groaned loudly as he came. With her head thrown back, goosebumps covering her entire body, and with the erratic rise and fall of her voluptuous Easts, Ron felt his spent member twitch excitedly with the knowledge that it had brought such ecstasy to such a beauty. Boom. Suddenly, the world seemed to shake around them. Ron, still fully sheathed in Hermione, turned around to see a glowing demon walk through the rubble that used to be his bedroom wall. Harry. Harry. Harry, Ron's feeble excuse was cut off by a roar of rage. Ron heard Hermione scream hysterically as a blast of magic hit him in the head with surprise etched on his face. Ron saw the room tumble around him and watched from the other side of the room as his headless body jerked with blood streaming in all directions before it collapsed on top of a shrieking Hermione. Ron. The redhead heard suddenly. He's too far gone, a familiar voice said. He sounded like he was being tortured. Another familiar voice laughed. It sounds like Harry did a number on him even in his sleep. There was a small pause in the conversation and rustling around him. If he was dreaming about what I think he was, then he deserved everything he got. Morgana, could you imagine what Harry would do if heard that his former best friend was having wet dreams about his girl? A dream. Was it only a dream? Ron shook the sleep from his head and slowly opened his eyes. It had all felt so real. If Wigston hadn't threatened me with suspension, I would end him for disrupting my sleep. Covered in piss or not? Ron noticed Neville glaring at him from one side of his bed as if he had insulted his grandmother and his parents. Well, it looks like Loverboy is awake at last, Dean said, clearing his throat and pulling Neville's attention from the prone redhead. Maybe the moaning and screaming will be over for the night, he grumbled, heading back to his bed in the corner of the room. Seamus threw an exasperated look at the window where the sun was slowly rising. I think I'll just head down for an early breakfast. We might as well get a head start on this week's homework. Neville growled something inaudible that had Seamus laughing on their way to the showers. It's not my fault you decided to take like 10 of the new classes. I'm at my wit's end with just 2. Seamus exclaimed with a snort of laughter. I wanted wizarding politics, law and economics, magical history, and magical traditions and etiquette for my lordship. Geomagic and advanced herbology were prerequisites for my geomagic and herbology masteries. Ron shuddered. He had only taken the required courses. He had been overwhelmed in January at the prospect of over 20 new courses. Some met once or twice a week. It was now February, and Ron had not regretted his decision. Everyone but him was drowning in homework. Most courses won't even count towards the owls. What's the point of increasing my workload during owls and for no credit? He was sure Hermione would have taken everything though. You're in my weekly technomancy course too. Dean reminded Neville as he too slowly made his way to the showers, probably figuring that trying to get more sleep would be futile. Seamus snorted loudly from the bathroom, only because Nev here wants to use the knowledge of how Muggle non-mags grow plants with light bulbs and sprinklers in his own greenhouses. What a green nerd. Neville apparently hit Seamus, judging by the sound of a wet towel meeting skin and Seamus yelp. Ron ignored the friendly banter, although he missed it, and not being an outsider within his own cohort, terribly, and concentrated on his difficult situation. Like Neville said, he had wet himself. He closed his eyes as he took a few calming breaths. No self-respecting 15 almost 16-year-old pissed himself. He knew the boys would never let him live it down. Not remembering any housekeeping spells to help him clean up, and not seeing any reason to remind the guys of his little accident, Ron simply waited until all three had left for an early breakfast before he went to shower. He left the wet bedding for the elves to take care of. As he made his way through the common room, his twin brothers made small, pissing noises between their teeth as he passed them. Ron shuddered at the reaming and pranks the two must have in store for him, but he straightened his back, squared his shoulders and made his way through the portrait hole despite their piercing giggles behind his back. There were now more people in the hallways than ever before, and Ron found it fairly easy to blend in with the crowd and remain unnoticed. With the mastery students, the extra teachers, teacher assistants, and the new heads of houses, Hogwarts seemed much fuller, busier. Ron had the feeling that there were even more students than there had been before the break. There were definitely more students around his age. Where did they all come from? Even the new tables in the great halls were usually filled to the brink of being overcrowded during each meal. As he made his way down the staircases to the great halls, he noticed the portraits speaking to each other in excited whispers. There was also more chattering than usual in the hallways as well. People were walking in groups, huddled over one or more newspapers, hoping news of his nightmare episode hadn't made its rounds already. He ignored the activity around him. As he made his way through the new Champions Hall and passed by the marble bust of Cedric Diggory by the Great Halls, the bell rang as it first period already. Ron groaned as his stomach growled in protest. He had never missed a meal. More than a bit depressed, he merely turned and made his way towards the new Charms wing. Mr. Weasley. Mr. Weasley. Ron groaned aloud once more. He had forgotten that it was Thursday, and he had a meeting for career advice with the new head of Gryffindor in his first period today. The beautiful, brown-haired Muggle-born Violet Wigston had taken over the head of Gryffindor duties from McGonagall and planned to have meetings with each student 3 or more times a semester to go over their career decisions, requirements, and goals in addition to school-related matters like notes, extracurriculars, and feedback from professors. She also offered Muggle and magical classes on mind magic which were apparently well attended by the male population and well liked by all. Ron was still astonished that the Muggles had mind magic even though they called it psycho something. Mr. Weasley, with classes cancelled for the day, I believe we can move our appointment to a different time, the young woman said, out of breath and clutching the grand staircase while trying to catch her breath. I will allow you with a new appointment once everything has settled. Cancelled. He repeated in shock. He noticed suddenly that most of the students in the hallway were heading in all directions, some even heading out into the cold February weather, or merely forming circles to discuss something. Wigston regarded him in shock. You haven't heard the news. As Ron shook his head, she thrust a well-worn and fairly heavy newspaper at him. He read the titles and instantly understood the excitement around him. The boy WHO triumphed. Tom Riddle defeated for good. The Potters go to war. Exclusive eyewitness accounts from the final battle. Below the flashing titles of the Daily Prophet was a photo of a glowing and furious-looking Harry swinging a broadsword as if he had been born with it and beheading a surprised, snake-like man with one swipe. Ron swallowed thickly as he remembered his dream. Amazing, isn't it? It happened yesterday, apparently, in the Potter family. Ron tuned the woman out as he skimmed the articles on the battle, the ferociousness of the Potters, and the many photos of the end of the battle after the large magical discharges had been investigated by the Aurors and their usual journalist followers. Maybe I do have some form of sight. I need to speak with Firenze. With shaking fingers, Ron turned the page to read more about the final battle and the exploits of the Potters from eyewitnesses in the Ministry of Magic and the reporters who followed them. Probably noticing the one-sided conversation, Wigston departed after a while, leaving Ron, once more, alone in the middle of the busy hall. The day prior, when Harry Potter calls you for a war council, you come. Bill, however, had never expected the war council to consist of so many people. Approximately 50 adult Potters of various ages were gearing up for their upcoming battle. Bill could feel the fury and determination in the air. The bloodthirst of the Potters ran deeper than anyone would have expected. You know who had killed hundreds of people, ended more lines than one could probably count, yet no family had pulled together like this as one to revenge their lost ones. Both of his families, the Prewetts and the Weasleys, had both lost many loved ones to the Dark Lord, but neither family had gathered and declared. Bill's grandmother Lucretia Prewett née Black had mentioned in passing to him that Potter had attended the Black family gathering as the only named male heir a month prior, and according to Narcissa Malfoy, who his brother Charlie was apparently getting intimately close to, Potter had not needed to ask the Blacks for their wands in ridding the world of the man that had thinned their once numerous house to 2 non-headline heirs, an unwilling heir Black, and a few elderly witches and wizards. The Blacks had already cast their lot in with Potter and immediately offered their assistance to the Potters, but Potter had apparently refused to accept more than their blessings and their permission to use Black family magic if necessary. Bill wondered briefly if that had been a clever decision. We will need all the wands we can get if the whispers of mercenaries were correct. Potter said he had good reasons for it, but a group of fewer than 100 wizards could not have any chance against an army of 5 times that size. Bill had nearly thrown up when he heard that nearly 400 mercenaries were coming in from all over the world to support you-know-who. As he looked around at the people, mostly Potters, although Sirius, Mad-Eye Moody, and Severus were also present, he saw that some were putting on the ominous-looking black robes that Potter and Potter's cousin had worn in the attack on Riddle Manor, setting up communication spitsets on their heads and speaking to one another in low tones. He wondered briefly if he was the only one having second thoughts about the seemingly impossible mission. Dumbledore may have asked us to do a lot of dangerous things, more than were probably necessary, but at least he never asked us to go on death-defying missions. A tiny voice in the back of his head whispered, maybe that is why the war has gone on for so long. Are you geared up? Potter asked, already knowing the answer, and thus summoned Bill a set of robes. Bill hesitated. He definitely remembered Potter wearing something similar during their last mission and could remember a few details of the cloak, but, is this all Potter has in his arsenal? Will the cloak be the only protection we have? He wondered if Potter would see his question as a sign of subordination and remove him from the mission. He even, briefly, considered purposely antagonizing the team to get kicked off the fatal mission. Yeah, what's with the funny dresses and shit? One of Potter's closest blood relatives, judging by the similar bone structure, asked with a jarring, Yankee accent. There were few laughs. Everyone seemed to be wondering the same, if not something similar, or were too focused to notice the question. There is no better time than the present to go over the plan for today, Potter said with a disarming smile at his cousin. Bill took the cloak and put it on as Potter turned away from him. Bill tuned out the following introduction seminar for the cloaks and spitsets he had used, both with varying degrees of success when they had targeted Riddle Manor. He was still amazed by the teens, if one can still call him that, with his liberal use of time magic, resolve and leadership. Charlie was head over heels impressed with Potter, and Bill was certain that some of it had rubbed off on him. The rescued dragons were flat out refusing to leave the refuge Potter had provided for them, since the large island was uncharted and hidden to both magical and muggle eyes. Food was there aplenty, and the dragons had already begun building nests and digging holes in the hillsides to provide themselves and their progeny with shelter from the weather. With his brother being the most experienced dragon handler on site, Charlie was quickly put in charge of the secret sanctuary with a rather generous salary and budget by Potter. His brother's opinion of the raven-haired lord had intensified. I don't think I've ever met a genuinely generous person until Harry came along, Charlie had gushed to Bill weeks prior. Bill couldn't deny Potter's philanthropy, but he doubted that the teen man did anything anymore without looking at least a few generations into the future. While he might not reap any immediate benefits, a score of healthy and willing dragons would bring future generations of Potters much esteem, more galleons than he or Charlie could possibly imagine, and maybe even security. It was widely known that dragons protected anything they treasured to the last bone and scale, even people. Bill shuddered at the thought of a possible army of defensive and angry dragons under the control of a single family or person. There is a reason why the ICW oversees all dragon reserves. Watching Potter instruct the others on how to properly use the cloaks and headsets only reinforced the notion that there was a lot more to Potter, and the Potters in general, than the world seemed to know. Luckily, the Potters seemed to value the "live and let live" motto of the Grey families. Merlin forbid a dark Potter arises. You might want to pay attention now, a deep voice said from behind him, thoroughly startling him out of his thoughts. Sirius stood beside him with a serious stance and a small, lopsided grin. Bill huffed cheerily and hoped the older man couldn't see the red in his cheeks. Sirius gave a small bark of laughter before turning his attention fully to his godson. Bill slowly released a breath he had been holding while Sirius' gray eyes had bored into his own. Those eyes. Using all of the occlumency techniques from his Cursebreaker training, he quickly managed to end that thought before it had the opportunity to settle in his head. His mental shields went up so quickly that he swayed slightly on his feet. He caught himself on a nearby chair and managed to recuperate fast. Potter was in the middle of splitting the group into smaller groups with specific tasks. Form the perimeter of the phalanx. Bill apparently had missed much more than he originally thought. His developed occlumency picked up Potter's last words and triggered memories on the origins of the Potters. Specifically, one of the lessons in pureblood history with his father shot to the forefront of his mind. His father, who, despite being deemed a blood traitor, had continued the Weasley tradition of orally passing on the stories of the houses that House Weasley had married into to the eldest son. One of those houses in the 15th century had been the newly ennobled Potters. The Potters are a powerful, proud and privileged bunch, his father had said to the 8-year-old Bill over a game of chess. Bill wondered in a brief, omniscient retrospection if the alliteration had been intentional. Leopold Potter, the first Potter, was an example of all three. But he had not been the first Potter. As the history books state, the Potters, though with other names, have drawn their lineage back through ancient times. I don't know all the details, but it was passed on to our family that the Potter magic dates back to ancient times. As one story goes, an evil presence swept through the then Persia, bringing misery and destruction around 300 years before time was rewound. Bursus was the name of the evil wizard. He gathered an army of nearly 5,000 devoted magic users, and at that time, there couldn't have been more than 15,000 wizards and witches worldwide. Bursus, fascinated with the recent exploits of the Mughal king, Alexander III of Macedon, believed that the oracle of Siwa Oasis, a Mughal seer of sorts in ancient Egypt, who had prophesied Alexander's greatness just days before, should also declare him, Bursus, as the universal ruler of magic. Bill remembered his father leaning back from the table, lost in thought. Bursus was refused an audience with the Mughal seer, who was still recovering from Alexander III's visit. Rather than attacking the oracle, which many believed would bring the wrath of the gods upon them, Bursus cut off the head of a person per day of refusal. He mistakenly drew his victims from a local village which housed some nomadic forefathers of the Potters, and thus killed a few members of their family before the Potters fought back. Bursus learned then what many know instinctively now: no army can withstand the fury of vengeful Potters. The wizard Amasis, son of Eucharios the Potter, gathered his family and launched an attack on Bursus and his army of 5,000. The family of 50 wizards, squibs and muggles, miraculously drove the larger army back. How, Papa? Bill had asked, wide-eyed. Their chess game was long forgotten, but his father had probably distracted him to keep from losing again to his rather gifted son. Hindsight is spectacular, Bill grumbled mentally. His father had given him a rather confused look. It is unclear. Most believe that the Potters have a strong connection to magic. My father told me that even the Macedonian kings caught wind of the Potters' methods and used them, a phalanx or something of that sort. No one not of direct Potter lineage knows exactly, though maybe the knowledge of the magic has been lost to the Potters as well. The most important thing to remember here is that Potters are protective of their own, and that their family magic, whatever its scope and origin, can push back armies 100 times larger than their own. Bill, Sirius said, shaking Bill out of his thoughts. Bill let up his occlumency shield slightly, realizing immediately why he had gone so deep into contemplation. He rarely had his walls up so tight, and only when he needed to review his memories in great detail. Sorry, I had my shields up too strong, he said, rubbing his eyes. The room had emptied of all but him and Sirius. Did I miss the mission? Come on, everyone is waiting for you in the entrance hall. I'll explain to you what your duties will be. I never knew my little Prongs Jr. was such a strategist, Sirius said, slowly wrapping an arm around Bill's shoulder to lead him to where the others were waiting. Bill forced back a shiver as Sirius' fingers slid over his neck. Harry was nervous. His mouth moved confidently as he laid out the objectives of the mission and the duties of each group, but his mind swirled furiously around a different topic. Over the course of the last 2 weeks, FC had locked himself in the Lord's study with Harry to go over the intelligence they had received on Snakeface's offshore recruiting and to come up with action plans. 2 covens of vampires of a minor Russian clan, a few packs of werewolves from France and Germany, and a few hundred paid mercenaries from across the globe had joined forces with the Dark Wizard. FC speculated briefly where Voldemort had received the funds to support an army of that size, but Harry chalked it up to hidden stores of galleons. More important to Harry was how they would end the bastard who had harmed their family and the world so much. It was the portrait of his grandfather, Charles Potter, in the Lord's study, who suggested that the two consult some of the eldest Potter portraits and the family grimoire on Potter family magic, in particular, battle magic. What followed were seemingly endless, time-turned days of research and planning. Harry's head still hurt when he considered the scores of books the two of them had devoured as they struggled to find hints in their family history on specific rituals or spells. It had all been in vain. Luckily, I walked through the Hall of Lords on my way to my own. A spontaneous chat with an ancestor, Linfred Potter, had Harry scrambling back into his study. The Potters were always a pretty powerful bunch and had come up with many powerful rituals and spells, but their expertise and strength were more so in their protection and defense rather than curses and offensive, battle magic. Linfred, the father of Harry's namesake as well as their infamous ancestor, Hardwin Power, was rather patient in explaining what he knew about the so-called Potter shield and phalanx, which Harry and FC based most of their strategy on. The shield was pretty simple yet seemingly impenetrable to anything except the unforgivables. Possibly Linfred, or Grandpa Linny, as he preferred to be called, showed great interest in the magics behind the spell and even joined Charles Potter, his great-grandson, in his portrait to monitor their progress with the rather ancient spell. The Potter shield is basically a physical representation of our family magic, Harry heard his voice confidently explain to the crowd. Therefore, those of us with the strongest connection to our family magic, including FC and myself, will be on the front line. Our job is to keep the shield up and the phalanx strong behind us will be our heavy hitters, he said, throwing a look at a group of cousins as well as Sirius and Mad-Eye Moody who all had grim, yet determined faces. Your job is to take down anyone who attacks us head-on. They all gave a quick nod. Will we be prosecuted for using spells of darker nature? Henriette spoke up from the other side of the room where a group of people stood. FC called them the dissenters, since they objected to Harry's actions since Uncle Virgil's funeral. The funeral had caused a small rift in the family, especially the Australian side. Some people, Henriette included, wanted Jonas and his father disowned. They followed old form to the word, and there it was dictated that a betrayal that led to the death of a Potter deserved nothing less than banishment from the house. Harry believed also that Henriette wanted to see others punished harshly since she had been severely punished by Harry. It surprised Harry how the sentiment had split the family, generally along the generational lines. Virgil's siblings and some of the elder generations were surprised by, but supportive of, Harry's decision to let the family magic be the judge in punishing Jonas. Aunt Gina and uncles PH and LL seemed to find the punishment of excommunication without disownment fair and fitting. Harry had the feeling that the older generations were more into sustaining their numbers from their experiences of being the only Potters of their generation after the Great Fire. There were even some from all generations and cadet branches who were angry with Harry for attending the Blacks gathering after the funeral and for not showing more mourning for Uncle Virgil's untimely passing. Harry had been implacable for days after that was revealed to him. It was in those days that Harry spent nearly every minute he could with Hermione to avoid the drama. Harry's mind wandered to the true reason for his distracted mind as he responded absent-mindedly to Henriette's question. Hermione's current condition left much to be said and also weighed heavily on his mind. FC's mature reaction was to run around singing, "Hermione's up the duff. Hermione's up the duff," until Hermione turned him into a pig. It should not have surprised anyone that Myone managed to teach herself NEWT-level transfiguration on her own. In between everything else that was going on, she had been fascinated by the topic since he turned 3 of Snakeface's servants into rats a few weeks prior. Despite the numerous medicines they had used, everything still ended up exactly as they hadn't planned. FC, once he was returned to his human form, revealed that family magic most likely was behind the unexpected pregnancy. Much like with the connection between himself and Henriette last year, FC believed that family magic had stepped in to improve the survival of the headline. The thought of magic inducing and influencing a pregnancy sent Hermione on another researching spree in the Manor Library. Harry didn't see his bushy-haired girlfriend for at least 2 days afterward, and he was sure that she also disappeared to escape having to see the man who had possibly ruined her life. A pregnant lull in the conversation he was actively leading yanked Harry out of his thoughts. He took a deep breath as he looked out at the sea of expectant faces. He was proud, motivated even, by the fierce determination that greeted him from all sides. "It is a lot to ask, even of family," Harry said. His worn voice had long since taken on a throaty tone. "Regardless of your connection to the Potters, regardless of your age or feelings towards me, together we will remove this dark stain from history. This evil has haunted and destroyed our families, terrorized our youth and homes. It is time we put the snake bastard down for good." A loud cheer ripped through the crowd and shook the very foundations of the original Potter Hall. "We fight not for ourselves but for our futures," Harry yelled over the still cheering voices. He waited a moment until the cheering died down before he spoke again. "I know it is a lot to ask of you. If I could, I would face Snakeface and his Death Nibbler army on my own just to keep any of you from fighting," he said softly, meaning every word he said. "Unfortunately, I can't help. I was even forbidden from leaving the house alone by most of you." He let the tense chatter and laughter that followed run its course. "Since I can't guarantee your safety, I see it as my duty to guarantee your survival. Each of you has been fitted with a special portkey that will activate on a voice command, or if you are hit with a spell. I don't know how Hermione did it, but I've long since given up on trying to understand her brilliance." He smiled at his reddening girlfriend from across the room as many turned to applaud her. After having learned of her condition, he had all but commanded her to oversee the medical ward with Snape and monitor the wards to the house. In his absence, neither of them found it odd that Hermione had an easier time managing the wards that Harry did, even though the two of them shared the duty. She did, however, rant at him for overprotecting her and ordering her about. "The Portkeys will also bring you here if you say, 'Home,' or 'Help,'" Harry said, bringing everyone's attention back to him. His stomach churned as he realized he had nothing else to say. The time had come. "The first to Portkey in will be our snipers. Please use the robes and any spells you know to disguise yourselves, and the others. The first flank will Portkey in with our heavy hitters to knock on Tommy's door." Those mentioned nodded and began preparing themselves. "The second flank will Portkey in with our protectors." Moments afterward, "We assume the wards will not have fallen by that time, so go in with your wands lit afterward. Our last group, our destroyers, will Portkey in to take care of the hideout and any stragglers." He forced nervousness out of his system while his eyes narrowed. "We will not hold back, we will not break, we will not take prisoners, we will show them how Potters fight." That was it, Harry thought as he caught Hermione's tearful eyes and her hidden message to come back home safely. She looked every bit the lady of the house and had even taken it upon herself to learn everything she could about the ways of their house. It had choked Harry up with deep emotion when he learned from his soon-to-be cousin Mauve about Hermione's secret lessons with her and some of his cousins, uncles, and aunts. She took her new position in the family seriously, as she did with whatever she put her mind to. Should something happen to Harry, she knew it would fall to her to be strong and educate the son or daughter currently growing in her belly. "May magic protect us all," Harry thought as he prepared to Portkey out. The weather on the soon-to-be battlefield was tantalizingly sunny and cheerful. Birds chirped and a soft, spring wind slowly chipped away at the frost that covered the surrounding grass and trees. The first 4 Potters who Portkeyed in barely made a sound. They quickly took out invisible brooms and made their way towards the small black dot in the distant, Riddle's hideout. Harry had been clear that they were not to alert Riddle of their presence. That was the job of the heavy hitters. It was also the reason why the Portkeys for the snipers took them so far away from Riddle's hideout. "I feel a proximity ward coming up." Pharaoh Potter, a blood-adopted son of Percival Herman and Annabelle, or Mama Anna as their side of the family called their matriarch, said into his spitset to his blood brothers Amaria and John, whose real name, Jothario, had had him teased much as a kid. It was their cousin Delphine, a daughter of Uncle Lester, however, who responded, "You will wait before, non." Her musical voice rang sweetly in their ears. It was the product of decades of refining her siren genes and enchantress magic. "No, I mean, yes." Pharaoh stuttered briefly. His brothers laughed briefly in the background. Even at the ripe age of 49 and after 4 decades of being endlessly teased, Pharaoh was still rendered a stuttering mess by his beautiful cousin. Pharaoh growled back at his siblings, "We will circle quickly to see if we can feel a weak spot and take our posts." "Aye aye, Captain." His second's younger brothers called simultaneously into their spitsets. He rolled his eyes. "This is going to be a helluva adventure," he thought with a mental sigh. As the third group of snipers Portkeyed in, they immediately followed their cousins toward the hideout. They could see the black robes of their 8 fellow snipers but did not fly to them. Their duty was to quickly scope out a few good hideouts near where the heavy hitters would land so that they could watch their backs. "Careful everyone, there are lethal wards up to 200 feet around the manor," one of their numerous cousins said over the spitset. "What the hell is that in normal measurements?" one of the last snipers to Portkey in asked back angrily. Someone giggled, but there was a pause as the seriousness of the question kicked in. It was absolutely necessary that they all understood each other perfectly. Small miscommunications could lead to fatal results. "I don't know exactly, but I do know that 200 feet or less than 100 meters, someone else said, "so, it's best to not go beyond 100 meters. Thanks. We should let the others, the heavy hitters, know when they arrive. I don't know if they can hear us." "We hear you loud and clear." Just as the last of the snipers settled in a tree near the Gothic manor that Riddle was using for his hideout, a massive shift in magic was felt near the entrance of the property. As around 20 or so Potters and the few non-Potters on the mission arrived together with their Lord Potter, and what a sight he was. If there was ever any doubt that the armored, young lord could lead their family, that doubt died at the sight of the battle-ready Henry James Potter with his outstretched wand blurring with rapid movement and a dark glow of magic surrounding him. It was clear who was leading. Magic seemed to pick up around him, moving his robes and hair as one would imagine some mythical god to look. The most magic-sensitive of their group shivered at the intense concentration of magic he eluded. Merlin, someone murmured. No time was wasted as the most powerful members of their family struck at the wards, protecting their enemy like clockwork. A second, larger group portkeyed in while the attack on the wards caused an even larger displacement of magic to shake the very earth beneath their feet. It took a moment before everyone realized that the attack on the wards was not making the ground shake, but their Lord Potter was. Each blood-related Potter felt the family magic roar to life in their very veins as a fiery red shield flared to life in a circle around the phalanx. The shield grew skyward into a dome of blood fire before it turned transparent and snapped into place just as a figure cloaked in darkness appeared before the heavy hitters and sent out a wave of black magic in their direction. There was an ear-splitting boom as the dark magic was repelled off the shield and rocketed back in the direction of the caster. The figure in black shadows popped out of sight, allowing the dark magic to miss him and ricochet toward his own wards. The wards crackled under the assault and their magical components, lines of crackling magic, were bared to all. Potter. With his roar of pure rage, Riddle reappeared before the phalanx. Spells rained down on him and the now visible wards to his manner as everyone followed Harry's lead. There was a bustle of activity from the houses. Scores upon scores of people rushed from the large house to protect Riddle. The snipers held their fire. The Potter shield was doing its job of letting their spells through and blocking those of their enemies. The unforgivables were being taken care of by the protectors and their quick transfiguration work, and the phalanx took one step forward as one toward their foe. Werewolves coming in from the right, someone said over the spitset. Dear Merlin, they are fully transformed. How is that even possible? Anything is possible with magic, fool. FC growled into the spitset as he blasted 3 opponents with a spell that detached their torsos from their bodies. Without pausing and holding the shield with one wand or casting spells at Riddle with another, Harry spoke, Delphine, that's your cue. The beautiful woman instantly rose on an invisible broom into the air, opened her mouth and let loose a cord that made the very wind around them hold. Delphine had not planned to have her first debut in England under such conditions. It should have been in a comfortable concert setting like her last performance in Austria. Siren magic was a much begotten form of entertainment for wizards. Their songs held all of the enticement like those of the Vila without the overt and blinding seduction. The sole difference between the two subspecies of humans was the elemental aspect of their magic. Vila made men burn with desire or just burn in general if they so desired. Fully trained sirens were sorceresses of water and air. The most powerful of them could change the perceptions of men by creating mirages by manipulating water particles in the air. With most of the family aware of her maternal heritage, Delphine flew towards their enemies and began singing an old song of war. Some of the weak-minded among their opponents began screaming in fear as demonic creatures seemed to suddenly appear from within the ground to attack them. The snipers cut down the panicking troops with ease with so much spellfire flying in all directions. Riddle's army could not see that their attack was coming from above. Some of the paid wands even began attacking their own side in fright. You fools, Riddle hissed menacingly, it is merely a half-breed songstress. Find her. There is no water here, so she must be in the air. As the dark forces focused on finding Delphine, she slowly flew back towards the Potter shield. The chances of her getting hit were too high since her singing formed a concentration of magic that was easy to spot if one was experienced enough with it. Harry had warned her that Riddle was well learned and well traveled. It was definitely possible that he had come across one of her kind, or even her, in the past. Sure enough, Riddle's spells began raining in too close to her, and she began flying faster. Her song ended abruptly as a spell chipped the handle off her broom, causing the broom to malfunction and go into an uncontrolled, downward spin. A wave of magic hit her from below to slow her precarious descent. There was a moment where she thought she would be able to join her brethren on the ground. Suddenly, she was hit by a dark curse of unknown origin and caught fire. She blacked out from the heat and immense pain before her emergency portkey took her from the battlefield. Harry closed his eyes in obvious agony from the first casualty on their side of the battle. His plan had been simple: draw out the enemy, destroy their hideout, and destroy the enemy, and all of this with no, and if at all minimal, casualties to their side. Poor Delphine, if he remembered correctly, she had a performance in Germany a few weeks. He hoped she wasn't cursed with anything irreversible. He immediately clamped down on the fears and insecurities he felt rising so that he could focus on the task before him. The Potter shield flared suddenly as something moving unbelievably fast struck it multiple times from various angles. At some point, Henriette's voice could be heard screeching in every ear. Vampires. At this time of day. FC growled at the stupidity of the question. It was clear that dark magic was at work if werewolves were transforming without a full moon. Snipers. Get them off our asses. Harry yelled into his spitset, straining to hold up the shield under the assault. Apparently, the shield took its strength from the number of Potters it protected, but the brunt of any attacks to it was felt by the holder, Harry. As this realization set in, the shield flickered at the spot right before Harry under heavy attack from the other side. Riddle concentrated most of his attacks on that one spot and many of his followers were doing the same. A blanket of white magic suddenly appeared and floated down from the blue sky. It was held in place by 4 snipers, one in each corner, but their foes didn't see that. It was a spell from the Black Family grimoire on destroying undead creatures like vampires. It was usually tied into wards, but FC managed to deconstruct it and stabilize it without the ward components. As the white magic touched some of their enemies, especially the vampires, they were either immolated or fell to the ground stunned. While the heavy hitters were still attacking the wards. To Riddle's manner, the protectors took out any fallen vampires or enemies who had tried to fly over the shield. Almost anticlimactic, the wards to the hideout shimmered and exploded silently in an array of colors. Simultaneously, the anti-apparition and anti-portkey wards set up by the snipers snapped into place. If you believe you will keep me with your feeble wards, Potter. Bombs away. Harry yelled into his spitset, cutting Riddle off even though the Snake Man could not hear him. Harry wondered briefly how unsettling it must be to face an opponent you could not hear. Upon his command, the destroyers on brooms activated a second ward scheme before swiftly port-keying out to safety with the snippers. Riddle was agape. The explosion's magnitude shocked the man, if one could still call him that, into inaction. With a simple wave of his second, Elder Wand, Harry caused a thick layer of earth to slide over the phalanx to protect them from the blast and debris from all sides. He hoped he had also managed to unseat his opponents as well. After a few moments of debris crashing against his earthen shield, Harry returned everything back with another wave of his second wand. Despite the effectiveness of the tactic, the blast had only somewhat thinned the number of their opponents. The army was still at least 3 or 4 times larger than the Potter army. Riddle's magic exploded in an impressive display of rage. A shockwave of his magic furiously hit the Potter shield, bringing Harry to his knees and creating a small hole in the, now, rosy shield. As planned, FC and a few other heavy hitters took control of the shield while Harry recuperated. However, the shield had flickered in and out of existence for too long, and 3 more Potters were felled by spellfire from their enemies. FC banished a stray werewolf who was clawing at them through the hole in the shield into the burning embers of Riddle's hideout without a second thought. Following FC's example, many began doing the same with their opponents to conserve energy. Without warning, a cutting spell slipped through the opening in the shield and hit Harry in the just as he was righting himself. The force of the spell blasted him off his feet, but he did not disappear to Potter Manor like Delphine and the few others who had gotten hit with spells. It was clear to all that Harry was prepared to carry through to the end. Seeing Harry down, the phalanx took another step forward and the invisible protectors began spanning out to push their enemies into a circle. The snipers and destroyers rejoined the battle quickly and sped around their enemies while casting the most destructive spells into the midst of their enemies to keep them all busy and confused. Harry removed the armor on his and cauterized the bleeding wound that stretched from his neck to his navel. With a grunt he got back to his feet, only to duck a stray spell from his own people. He barely noticed it as he retook control of the shield and sealed the hole in it. Riddle seemed to have grasped the extent of their tactics as he began instructing part of his troops to shield, some to attack the shield and others to shoot down the Potters on brooms. A few of the snipers were shot down and were immediately portkeyed out. Unfortunately for Riddle, the realization came too late. His numbers had been thinned too meticulously to have the power to overwhelm the shield. Harry felt the turn of the battle upon them. It was clear that the end had to happen quickly. His last plan, his ultimate weapon, was soon all he had in mind. He stowed the Elder Wand he had summoned from Dumbledore many weeks ago away and thrust a wandless hand towards the ground. His magic thrummed around him like an adrenaline-filled soldier. Even the shield pulsed with a new energy as the wild magic answered Harry's summon. There was a near-silent lull in the battle as the glow around Harry darkened and flashed. FC lay his hand on Harry's shoulder and Sirius did the same to him. A rumble began from deep within the ground as all those who touched him shared their magic. his magic, the family magic and the wild magic around them. What magic is this? Riddle snarled as the earth once more moved underneath his feet, assuming a repeat of the earth sliding or worse. He launched himself into the air and fell under heavy spellfire from the snipers and unknowingly flew directly into Harry's attack. Harry struggled under the weight of so much magic, but he slowly lifted his hand to the sky and summoned. Almost instantly, thousands of bolts of lightning rained down from the clear February sky towards Riddle's army. Harry struggled to control the lighting and keep it from striking the Potters on the ground or in the air. Many from both sides screamed in terror at the sudden light, loud claps of thunder and heat. And within mere seconds, it was over. Harry sagged from the buckling magnitude of the spell that had changed the very characteristics and electrical current of the earth around them. He had been the conductor of possibly the most powerful spell cast in time immemorial, and he felt as such. He had a feeling that Hermione would be feverishly reviewing the memory of the spell to adequately describe it in the family grimoire. He shook and lifted his heavy head to see that Riddle had also been struck and lay twitching on the ground from the surprise elemental spell that had also disintegrated most of his troops. The battlefield was no longer full of spellfire. The Potter shield wavered, close to collapsing. Harry's stomach almost rebelled at the smell of burnt flesh and the tragic waste of so many lives. Suddenly, Harry was pushed to the ground by someone from his side of the shield. He went down hard and the wind was knocked out of him while the Potter shield flickered for the last time out of existence. The skin on Bill Weasley's face, and most likely the rest of his body, blackened, peeled off in shriveled strips and caught fire from the dark curse that was meant for Harry before he was portkeyed away. Harry found himself unable to think. A hatred so strong pulsed through his entire being. Exhausted by the battle and the mere existence of Riddle, he merely summoned Riddle's wand, his last soul piece. The wand barely made it into his hands before he made it burst into flames. The unholy scream it gave snapped him back to reality. As planned with FC, Harry called out to Fawkes as he slowly made his way through the field of burnt carcasses and remains of Riddle's army, with his family flanking him on all sides, checking for and putting down any of their surviving opponents. The majestic bird appeared in a burst of flames, trilling an uplifting song. "Thanks for coming, my friend. I need the sword." Fawkes gave him and the surrounding area a sharp look, and before he flashed out. Harry barely noticed the bird returning or the approaching of oars and reporters. He approached his still twitching foe with determined movements. "You will never defeat me, Potter. You may have won this time, but I'll be back," the snack-faced bastard hissed, futilely trying to apparate out. Harry didn't spare him a comment. He heaved the mighty sword of Gryffindor, his birthright, over his shoulder and ended the life of one Tom Marvolo Riddle with a swift swing. There was no cheering crowds or fireworks as Harry closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the battle slide from his shoulders. He slowly collapsed to his knees, bloody sword in hand, and wept in joy. Without warning, Harry keeled over, unconscious, spent and magically drained when he awoke in the makeshift medical wing of his manor 3 days later. Most of the celebration spirit had receded, although that was the last thing on his mind. He turned to his worried and pregnant girlfriend sitting on the edge of his hospital bed. "It's over, my own," he said simply. She gave a teary laugh. "It's over, you did it." Harry sighed, feeling worse than he looked. "No, but we did it," he corrected her, "we did it. And that, my children, is the story of Lord Henry Potter and the downfall of Voldemort." The 153-year-old Dowager Hermione Potter finished the tale she had told many times before. However, this time to a new batch of Potters. She loved talking about the family history, especially the history she had experienced firsthand. She just wished her beloved Harry were still around to tell the stories with her like they used to do. His passing 3 years prior had hit her pretty hard. His portrait doesn't do him justice, she thought sadly. "Grandmama," one of the youngest of the bunch asked, having listened to her tell the story of their former lord of their house for the past hours. "The history books say that Grandpa Harry did it all alone." Hermione sighed. It was true, and those historical retellings of the battle had driven Harry up the wall. Many of the authors of those books were not even born at the time. Most wanted to make your grandpa into some sort of supernatural hero, and it is not true. Harry was many things: brave, powerful, intelligent and often courageous, but he was also only human. The child gaped at her. It was clear that he too idolized his, well, Hermione wasn't quite sure how the sandy-haired boy was related to Harry or even her. He seemed to be of the Longbottom blood. Did one of Neville's marry into the Potter family again? It was a running family joke that Neville had never wanted his children to marry Harry's, yet there seemed to be a new Potter Longbottom wedding every generation or so. That's what happens when you have 8 children. Poor Hannah Longbottom, I don't know how she managed. Potter Manor had grown into a hub for potters worldwide after their defeat of Riddle even more than a century after the battle. The manor housed over 100 potters and relatives. Harry had even spent a large fortune on expanding the manor some decades ago into a small castle so that everyone who wanted to live there could do so comfortably. He always wanted a big family. I don't think even he knew how he was related to everyone despite his liberal use of family magic. The Potter family had grown by leaps and bounds. Many of the older generation who lived under or remembered the tyranny of Lord Hardwin Potter, Harry's great-great-grandfather, had been happy to leave England and escape from him. Harry's lordship, his fame and endless dedication to his family had reversed the exodus, mentally and physically. Hermione only wished that she could have provided him with more than 2 sons. After Davy, their youngest, was born in 2000, their family Medowitch revealed that the difficult pregnancy had been their last. It had broken Harry's heart. His dream had been to have enough children to make a Potter-only Quidditch team to compete with Neville. Most likely he never said anything but words of comfort to her when the topic had come up, but she knew it had torn him apart. He made up for the lack of children by showering the 2 they had with even more love and affection. There were times where Hermione even felt like a proverbial 3rd or 4th wheel in their immediate family due to the bond between her boys, but she had never spoken a word of it to Harry about it. Grandma Myone, spoke another child, Gordon Jr. His relation to her was much less ambiguous since he was the son of her great-nephew Gordon Black Potter. Can you tell another story, please? Hermione took a look at the time. It was way past all of their bedtimes. She was feeling every bit her age today, and more tired than she had ever felt in her entire life. A small pang of fear suddenly hit her. In a moment of extreme clarity she had a suspicion of what her increasing lethargy meant. Not tonight, you lot, she said as cheery as possible to hide the knot of mixed emotions that filled her suddenly. Tomorrow, I will tell you the story of your grandpa Harry's year as a professor. The one where you turned him into a talking chicken for a week for interrupting your history classes. A young girl with obvious Weasley Potter heritage, and maybe a hint of Malfoy or Lovegood, Hermione noted mentally, taking in the girl's bright and silver eyes, asked excitedly. Hermione gave the girl a soft smile and promised, the very same. Now, off you trot. We don't want your parents to be angry, she said, shooing the group of chattering and groaning children from her sitting room and leaning back in her chair. Her hand strained slightly as she held a glass of water, and she slowly swallowed the remaining gulps. When the last of the 17 children, she had counted, departed with a cheery, "Good night, Grandma," Hermione immediately went to her pensieve and began extracting her memories from her head. She had lived a fruitful life with Harry, and their pensieve had been full of great memories by the time of his passing. Most had assumed that Harry would go into politics or teach immediately after defeating of Voldemort, but Harry had desired to see the world with his new family and learn of magics not previously known to him. Hermione had been more than happy to oblige with her own unyielding thirst for knowledge. After talking to Headmistress McGonagall, the then headmistress of Hogwarts Institute of Witchcraft and Wizardry, the 2 newlyweds postponed their owls and newts and took their leave of the UK. They had traveled the globe for nearly a decade, with both of their sons being born abroad. Sebastian Henry in Russia and David Virgil in South Africa. Those were magnificent days of adventure and research. The books she and Harry published on their interactions with esoteric magic from across the globe upon their return to England were still filling the Potter coffers. A content smile filled her aged face as she briefly relived those moments while extracting the memories. After enrolling Sebastian in Hogwarts, she and Harry took their owls and newts together. Harry had managed 1 owl more than she did and never let her forget it. She blamed the scoring on starstruck favoritism from the geomagic examiners. She got him back by besting him with a double outstanding for her magical history newt. A few tears rolled down her cheeks as she remembered the hilarious academic competitiveness that quickly became a large part of their relationship. She would publish a paper only to have Harry publish one that either refuted her thesis or topped her paper with an exciting new topic. She had responded in the like by doing the same to his publications. Their competition got so fierce one year that Harry even moved the ladies' study overnight to the opposite side of the manor, and as far from the family library as possible, just to anger her. I'm sure he enjoyed the remodeling I did of his study. He never did appreciate the color pink as he should have. She rubbed the tears and tiredness from her eyes. There was one last task she had to complete. Her memories of the next few years were more studies related. She had gone on to get her mastery in magical history and esoteric magics at Hogwarts. Harry, happy to again go against all expectations, became a stay-at-home father to Davy and homeschooled their youngest. He declined all jobs offers, whether from the Unspeakables, the Defense League of the ICW, Hogwarts or elsewhere. He spent his time delving as deep as he could into wild magic, often using the manor's wardstones as foci. Harry was easily the most powerful sorcerer. His legendary use of wordless, wandless and magic based purely on intent had made him the youngest sorcerer alive of his generation, and the number of foes he gained increased with time. Harry and many other Potters had single-handedly brought down some of the darkest wizards and witches of their time. However famous the Potters became for their actions, they rarely attacked as a group unless they were attacked first. Besides Hogwarts, Potter Manor gradually became the safest place in the UK. No one dared to attack the Potters for fear of retribution. It also might have had something to do with the dragons that keep mysteriously showing up around the manor. I'm happy Harry didn't listen to me and signed the Dragon Reserve over to the ICW. By the time she had finished her studies, Sebastian had left Hogwarts to travel the world a bit on his own, and Davy was in his 3rd year. She started teaching in Davy's 5th year and retired nearly a century later. When both of the boys had left the nest, Harry found his passion in politics and actively threw himself into it. Stirring up confusion in the ICW with his revolutionary ideas became his favorite pastime. He pushed for a more modern and inclusive world while never losing sight of his morals, vision or authenticity. He complained rarely and usually only about the Wizengamot or its chief wizard Draco Malfoy. Much to her surprise, and up to the day of his death, Harry maintained a rather odd friendship with both Bill Weasley and Draco Malfoy. Hermione assumed that Harry had enjoyed the fact that neither man worshipped the ground he walked on and were never anything but brutally honest with him. Hermione had often found it funny to watch the three bicker like little children about everything from Quidditch to politics, to whose children were smarter. She did not, however, spend time with their respective wives as societal code mandated, preferring the comfort of her books to the cold niceties. Henriette Malfoy reigned as a pureblood queen and took over as Lady of the Dark after Lady Black passed away and Dowager Malfoy disappeared seemingly into thin air. Hermione had her suspicions about what happened to the blonde woman since Charlie Weasley disappeared at the same time, but it never interested her enough to find out the truth. She was absolutely certain that Harry had had something to do with Dowager Malfoy's disappearance, especially since he and Draco Malfoy became closer afterwards. Nevertheless, Henriette had never forgiven her or Harry for her imprisonment and dethroning all those years ago, and she took to avoiding them at all costs. Hermione saw her once or twice a year at the yearly Potter or Black gathering and barely spoke more than a sentence to the wicked woman. Hermione was thrilled that Henriette gave birth to her 3 children much later than Hermione had. It reduced the amount of contact on that level as well, though the children had been very well behaved in her classes. Bill Weasley, Hermione wasn't too sure whether or not his rather bland and insipid wife knew of the partnership he had with Sirius and Severus. She and Severus had been colleagues for years during her tenure as professor and later head of the history department at Hogwarts, so she had the honor to use his first name, even though he called her Granger until he passed away. Frankly, Hermione despised the narrow-minded Rosemary Weasley and could care less whether or not the woman realized her only use to her husband had been her childbearing and child-rearing capabilities. Ding ding ding. The clock in her sitting room struck midnight. Hermione gave a deep yawn as she extracted the last of her memories. She slowly took a seat and a few pieces of parchment to put her affairs in order. Harry had already passed on the Peverell lordship and Slytherin title to Sebastian on their son's 25th birthday. Since Sebastian had pursued a career in politics and since Harry had no interest in dealing with the stagnant, old hags and codgers anymore. Davy had received the honored Potter lordship and the Gryffindor title from his father after he became the youngest headmaster ever of Hogwarts at age 40. It was rather interesting to work for her younger son, but the two of them found their way and worked together for over 60 years with minimum issues. She and Harry both had favored Davy. His caring and carefree personality matched his father's more so than his brother's calculating and ambitious personality, probably due to the years the two spent together alone while she and Sebastian were studying at Hogwarts. They loved both sons the same, but it was clear to all that they and the rest of the Potters wanted Davy as their next head of house. Hermione chewed her lip. If she passed on the Dagworth Granger lordship to Davy, it would most likely cause a rift between him and Sebastian. "Oh, I'm silly," Hermione remembered quickly that Harry passed on the Black Lordship to Sebastian as well after Sebastian's wife Maria Potter née Longbottom, the first and most hilarious of the Potter-Longbottom weddings, gave birth to a third son. Hermione quickly pinned that tidbit of information in her last message to the family before she formally bequeathed the Dagworth Granger Lordship to Davy. She sealed each of the letters with magic before addressing them to Gringotts and her sons. In a swirl of flames, Fawkes appeared before her with a soft and sad thrill, expectant and anticipating her wishes as always. "Indeed, old friend," she said, patting his head, and gave him the letters. "The time has come. Could you please take these letters to Gringotts and deliver the others when I'm gone?" Fawkes gave another sad trill with a nod of acknowledgement. He suddenly pointed with his beak to the wall where her fireplace was and where Harry's portrait was hanging, now asleep. It took a moment before she caught on. She summoned the legendary death stick from its concealed hiding spot in his frame, the wand that both Dumbledore and Harry had ironically used against Voldemort. With a small shudder from the amount of sentience and power in the wand, she handed it to Fawkes. After he secured the wand in his beak, she gave him one last instruction: "Please ensure that it falls into the hands of someone worthy enough of wielding it." Fawkes nodded once more and disappeared his burden. "Sebastian will not be happy that he didn't get it." Before she got ready for bed, she turned back to her pensieve and extracted two memories. One held the story she promised to tell the children tomorrow. Luckily, she had told most of her stories multiple times to different groups of Potter children, so she had several versions to choose from. She placed the memory in a vial with shaky fingers and quickly penned a note that the children should be allowed to view memory tomorrow night before bed and that other stories could be found in the pensieve. The second memory she put directly into her head. A bright smile lit up on her face as she laid herself down to sleep. She had always known that Harry had been the one to initiate their first key. In the Lord's study all those years ago, she had waited 137 years for the proof, and she couldn't wait to tell him she had been right when she saw him again soon. With that mission in mind, she drifted off to a well-deserved and peaceful rest. The next morning her body was found by their house elves with a small bright smile on her wrinkled face. Although he mourned when he heard the sad news, Lord David Virgil Potter was happy that his parents were reunited once more. After looking through some of their memories, he quickly found the right quote to engrave on their headstone. "Here rests Lord Henry James, our beloved Harry, and Lady Hermione Jane, our beloved Myone. Their eternal love remains forever a symbol of the true power of the Potters." 3 hours of makeup spells. It had taken Delphine 3 hours of heavy makeup to resume the appearance she had taken for granted for far too long. Her silken skin and Merlin-sculpted face had once driven men insane. Now her arms, her neck and her face were covered in more makeup than could be considered comfortable. Even the sleeveless gown she wore sat uncomfortably on her as it rubbed against the many layers of magical concealer. To some extent, she missed the days where less is more still applied to her. On the other hand, it was merely a part of her daily regime now. She barely paid it any more thought than she would brushing her teeth. "You never know what you had until it's gone," she thought to herself. The English saying slid through her mind like the slimy, parasitic remnant of a bad dream. The lights around the stage focused on the center as the Dutch announcer entered the stage to introduce the violinist, Master Yuki Fukui, simply known as Yuki, from Japan. The announcer, an unremarkable and stout wizard of little musical talent, blandly introduced the Japanese wizard to the crowds who had come for the 122nd International Magic in Music concert in Brussels. She and Yuki, a rather attractive yet unpleasantly silent and unhappy man, had unofficially dueled for the top prize at the international concert for the last 6 years. If Delphine managed to trump him again, she would be the longest reigning winner ever by 2 years. Yet another award for her career. If she were still the young, starry-eyed girl she had been before her disfigurement, she would be bursting with nervous excitement. For some reason, she couldn't bring herself to care as much about her accolades nowadays. The prize, a rather insignificant amount of galleons and a large trophy, would be rightfully hers regardless. She had managed to diversify her repertoire so successfully over the last few years that it was almost expected that she would win again. Her native French and even some international newspapers had been presumptively hailing her as the pre-winner for 1997, since the beginning of the year. Her music came from a magical, spiritual place deep within her soul, and, even to her, it was scarily transcendental, revealing and boundless sometimes, she couldn't truly look within herself unless she stood on a stage. She found that her nervousness of singing competitions and her instinctual stage fright added the extra emotional tinge to her music that had guaranteed her international success since she made her breakthrough in '88. And I probably will win again if Yuki doesn't stop making the judges feel so depressed with his music, she thought to herself. No one should feel so down in the summer. She had composed a few pop ballads with the best songwriters in both the magical and non-magical music industries over the last few months. The songs were going over quite well with the masses at the moment. Her chosen medley for the concert was a melodious mix of her latest hits. She considered it a definite shame that Yuki rarely attempted to connect with the audience or the latest trends in music. He was the Weird Sisters or the Fanged Dragons of the classical genre. Good for loyal fans but stubbornly stagnant, yet his talent in captivating audiences rivaled her own. She would have enjoyed the serious competition if he weren't so much of an emotional vomiter. I wish he weren't such a private person. I would love to know the person beneath his music. His tremulous melody suddenly halted her thoughts. She found herself suddenly listening more intently to his music than ever before. A particularly depressing chord from Yuki's violin suddenly struck her deeply. She closed her eyes in temporary agony. She could feel his cry to be loved, to be accepted, mixed with an anguish of constant failure to find someone to love him. Maybe she was just translating his music into her own anguish. Delphine let the music wash over and through her. She, too, longed for someone to see the person behind her beautiful, and she had no doubt of her talent. Voice. It was as if Yuki were playing her very heartstrings. The deep, hidden ache in her heart was simultaneously being laid bare for everyone and no one by a mere stranger. Since her injury during the final battle and defeat of the Dark Lord Tom Riddle nearly 2 years prior, Delphine had barely paused to reflect on the impact her full body burns had on her psyche. Fire had a horrible effect on sirens and their descendants, and she had been hit by a dark fire curse so powerful during the battle that she missed her own concert. 2 weeks afterward she had remained in a magic-induced coma for a month. No amount of potions, spells or family magic could reverse the scarring over 1/3 of her body that she had removed all but one of the numerous mirrors in her apartment, that she rarely went into public without multiple charms to mask the scars on her body. She had simply accepted. In the months thereafter no more thought was given to either the concealment routine or why she felt the need to hide the scars. Her family, especially her ever-observant Lord Potter, had noticed the drop in her spirit. Henry had offered to pay for her therapy or magical corrective surgery to make up for her sacrifice for the family. The offer was futile though nothing could be done for magical burns of that scale. His noble sentiments had also hit her too hard in the dark days that followed her coming out of the coma. She had wanted to blame him, to blame someone, for her disfigurement, for her impending life changes. Henry's authentic pain and commiseration on her behalf had been so tangible, however, that it alone had moved her to tears. Yuki's music swelled in a flood of piercing melancholic notes. She could hear a stagehand sniffling near her. Master of melancholy indeed, she thought to herself as her dark thoughts engulfed her once more. Her beauty was once a thing of marvel. It had rivaled that of her half-breed, fiery cousins in spirit, the Vila. Unlike the Vila, however, Delphine's beauty was more genetic rather than magical. Her maternal great-grandmother had been a half-siren of unknown origin. It was clear to Delphine that her talents were at least partially inherited during her youth, and her reaction to fire had always proved such. She had spent much of her young adult years searching for sirens and trying to understand, release and train her siren-inherited talents. She had learned then the reason for her childhood aversion to fire. Her musical success since then, since she had unlocked that key aspect of herself, had been unstoppable. She had sung before Europe's magical nobility, before the rich families in the world, and more government banquets than she could count. She was considered a star in magical musicology. She was the songstress most rated, a must-hear by international publications. Celestina Warbeck had even offered to take her on tour multiple times. Delphine had been smart enough to reject the gracious offers. Warbeck's fame was overwhelming, and Delphine would have been perpetually in the witch's shadow. The older witch still received much more airplay in Europe, except in Delphine's native France, than Delphine. Mostly because of her obnoxious banshee backup singers. Delphine's parents had been most supportive of her decision not to tour with Warbeck and her career decisions altogether. Somehow they had managed to simultaneously push her to challenge the status quo and kept her grounded despite her aspirations and her youthful arrogance. Endorsements and accolades had rained down on her endlessly. She had almost let the fame get to her, and then she responded to her lord's summons. She had thought then that she was invincible. The pain of her flesh burning was all she remembered of that day. The phantom, nightmarish pain still woke her up randomly at night. The lull of the applauding crowd reoriented her. She counted backward from 20 to steady herself. Here comes another stellar performance, she calmly told herself. Her father had once said the same to her before her first large debut. She had repeated his words before every single performance since, and they had definitely brought her luck. She dedicated much of her success to his faith in her. I wish you much, a quiet voice said in slightly broken English, startling her out of her reverie. In the darkness of the backstage, Delphines easily identified Yuki's remarkable face. Such a beautiful man with such a solemn soul. Thank you, she murmured back. Do dry your face before, he said carefully before he turned and continued on his way with his violin held protectively close to his heart. Delphine automatically wiped her face. To her surprise, tears wet her cheeks normally, her concealer and spells hid it all so well. No one had been able to see her cry in so long. But how? Wait, please, she called after the Japanese violinist, who immediately stopped. You can see me, my. Of course I have always been able to see you. That simple truth broke her walls so quickly that she shivered from the metaphorical overexposure. Her voice caught her throat. All this time, he had never treated her differently in any of their casual meetings or the celebrations that they had attended together. He had never even hinted that he could see beneath the mask she had carefully sculpted around herself for her image. A roar of cheering erupted from the crowds as her name was announced. The crowds quieted down somewhat after the announcer's sonorous voice quieted with a simple finite. Delphine couldn't move. A deeper meaning of Yuki's words flitted through her mind. I have always been able to see you. Your music, she asked simply, fresh tears already rolling down her face in the premonition of his next words. Yes, he answered carefully, as if apprehensive about her reaction. Yuki had been trying to reach her with his music all this time. Her name was being called out by stagehands and a wave of whispers bubbled up beyond the curtains. Her internal debate lasted mere seconds, but it felt like a lifetime to her. Her magic careened around her as she made possibly the biggest decision of her life. Yuki, quiet and solemn, merely approached her, reached out with a weird comfortably hand and gently pressed hers. No words were needed from his side. Delphine's magic settled suddenly while she raised her head and dried her tears. A stagehand called out to her in a confused whisper. Join me, she requested simply, grasping his hand like a lifeline. A fear like none other she had ever experienced swept through her, and Yuki was possible the only other person who knew her deepest despair. He did nothing but hold her hand tighter as she dispelled her concealment spells, spelling away some of her heavy makeup, and pulled him towards the confused crowd. She closed her eyes before the curtain was pulled back. A collective gasp arose from the audience. Whether it was from her appearance, Yuki's presence, or their holding hands, she could not tell. As the whispers rose around them, Yuki carefully positioned her hand behind his neck so that he could hold his violin and began playing something so magical that Delphine swayed. Here comes another stellar performance, she repeated to herself once more. She opened her eyes and looked into Yuki's dark brown and deeply emotional eyes. Your beauty comes from within, he said, leaning forward for a chaste key on her lips. She did not hear the reaction of the crowd. Her mouth opened absent-mindedly from the surprising key, and an unknown aria of so many emotions burst from her lips. Their musical instruments joined as one before the unprepared crowd of thousands. People rocked in their seats, clutched at the loved ones in the seats near them, and even cried openly. The hairs rose everywhere as two souls bore what they had and complemented each other so melodiously. Delphine's magic reached out to Yuki's, much like her hand stayed on his shoulder throughout the entirety of the nearly 10-minute duet. Just as they reached the end of their spiritual improvisation, Yuki's warm magic accepted hers. Delphine didn't even notice his violin stop playing as his magic joined and wrapped around hers. A long crescendo of unaccompanied high notes full of pure joy and content brought the crowds to their feet before the last note and the song had even officially ended. The two stood on stage, heaving for breath from the musical and magical exertion while the world went wild around them. Flowers and small tokens rained on the two, and the prize for the winners of that year's International Magic in Music concert was brought out before the two could even bow. The other concert singers applauded enthusiastically in the first rows. Delphine and Yuki could only look at one another and smile. No one could have known at that moment that the two world-class musicians had all but magically bonded before them, Sharing something so private, genuine and unprecedented with the world, one commentator stated in a raving review of Delphine Potter's revelation the following day. Their duet became known simply as the Ballad of Love. It was considered the song of the millennium and the breakthrough for both musicians, sending them directly into the annals of musical history in the international magical community. Both Yuki and Delphine's careers became boundless and full of awards, even though they both rarely performed live thereafter, tending only to play at Potter gatherings or the celebrations of their dearest friends and family. Although Yuki and Delphine never sang the Ballad of Love again, it brought tears to Delphine's eyes whenever she heard it, and it was played often in the years following the performance. To her, their anthem of love was more than a power ballad. It was the beginning of her relationship with her wonderful husband. In the 3 years following the concert, they had 2 marvelous children who Delphine always saw as a direct product of their love. She was seen as a heroine to many a generation of women for her courage and strength to show her disfigurement openly, especially when it became public knowledge that her disfigurement had been a result of her courageous actions during the final battle of the British Blood Wars. In the time following her revelation, Yuki tended to cancel her concealment spells immediately and without a comment whenever she applied them accidentally. After a few years of this loving treatment, she never felt the need to conceal her appearance again. November 1, 1981. Let it be said that Virgil Orville Potter had never once hated the Potter family magic. It was forever wrapped around him, a tangible cloak of pure warmth connecting him to those he loved. It had comforted him at his darkest moments and helped him when he thought no help would come. His connection to the magic ran deep as an elder and head of the Potter family, as well as due to so many decades of familiarization and use, and, although he had never told another soul except his dearly departed brother, Charlie, he felt sometimes as if their dear mother was with him, guiding him through their family magic. Such was not unheard of in old families like their own, but, since it bordered contemporary concepts of Grindelwald damned dark arts and necromancy, it was very much taboo. Nevertheless, the family magic was beginning to cut into his sleep and drive his emotions up the proverbial wall. The centuries old magic tugged constantly on his own, trying to get his attention like a worried familiar. It was just about as worrying and troubling as the coinciding news coming out of England of the death of his grandnephew, Lord James Hardwin Potter. Virgil, his beloved Sarah, began tentatively during dinner after 2 weeks of sleepless nights. Why don't you make the trip to England? Your magic is calling out to you for a reason. Morgana only knows why. Virgil barely winced at the blunt reminder of his wife's devotion to the darkest witch of the millennium. Her family, the De Corinos, had headed the legendary witch's matriarchal coven since its inception and produced a high priestess every single generation. Virgil considered for perhaps the 100th time his father's harsh comment on the night of his betrothal to Sarah. If you see no other option to spread your seed other than to lie with this rabid by.ch, born of S. As to a dead, dark enchantress, strike me at least where I stand and save me the shame of having to call her daughter. No one had been able to explain his father's unexpected and mysterious death. A day later, Sarah had mourned just like any other undesired daughter-in-law, which fooled only those she dubbed with here angelic and fay-like beauty, therefore everyone, he reminded himself. A pea suddenly bounced off of his nose. He gave Sarah a warning look but couldn't help but chuckle. Are you back, my love? Or should I try the potatoes? Her face was serious, but, after half a century of marriage, Virgil could see mirth waiting to burst from the twitching of the corners of her mouth. The magic around them surged suddenly. They were pitched into a sudden darkness. Portraits began screaming in the Hall of Lords as the house shook slightly, and house elves began popping in and out frantically to save and repair the fallen fixtures in the still rumbling room. I will head to Potter Manor tomorrow, he declared aloud, for Sarah's sake and in hope of pacifying the upset magic around them. Virgil sighed as the magic retracted. He was no longer of the head lineage. That disputable honor now was bestowed up his brother's progeny. He, like his remaining brothers, all headed their respective cadet lines and brought honor to the family. In other countries they rarely mixed and mingled, save for isolated instances or tragic events such as installing or burying a head of house, Charles and Charles respectively. To encroach upon another cadet line was met with deep disapproval and annoyance among the old families. Virgil's youth had been plagued by interhouse squabbling of other houses. He wondered briefly if the Parkinsons, the Blacks and the Abbotts ever settled their interfamily feuds. The Slytherin common room had been a battlefield at times during his time there. The punishment for encroaching upon the will and ways of the familial headline, however, was generally met with financial destruction, excommunication, public shaming, magical disowning or even the death of transgressors. Not only did the Lord, Lady of the house dole out punishment, but the house council did as well should there be no head of house. Thus, Virgil went to bed that night with more than one worry regarding his promise to his wife if he interfered, even accidentally, with what his brother's line in England deemed appropriate for their progeny and for the family at large. He would be bringing dishonor and possible ruin or punishment onto his own family in Australia. Maybe the family magic is confused, he considered briefly before discarding the thought as silly. My love. His wife's voice brought him suddenly out of his worrisome thoughts and to door to the master's bathroom where she stood. His breath left his lungs rather suddenly, and upside to marrying a woman of such a powerful coven was the almost Viola-like and time-defying beauty. Lay with me tonight and bless the birth of our newest grandbaby, Henriette. She clutched a slightly charred flow note in her hand, a sequined gown glittering around the parts of her body only he was privileged to see. Virgil barely registered the say. Magic building up around him as it had for the numerous blessing rituals he had completed with Sarah. His body responded immediately to the magic as if he were 50 years younger. His concerns about the repercussions of his future journey were driven out of his mind by unaged lust. Moving with a vitesse unusual, Virgil launched himself at his wife and drew her into his arms, planting key as to any uncovered skin her could find. With her sensual giggles broken only by the soft ritual chanting of her coven only known to their coven sisters, he steered her to their bed. When he lifted her gown and slid into her with one well-practiced thrust, she threw her head back in ecstasy and cried out the one word in the entire chant that he was familiar with, Morgana. And that, Father, is why dark enchantresses make great Potter wives. To be continue. I hope you enjoyed this story. Also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.